graveyard of the Ethelgard Nebula was silent, but it was not empty. Drifting through the violet gas clouds were the shattered hulks of two great armadas, the debris field stretching for light years like a spilled box of jagged toys. A human alliance destroyer, its hull sheared in half, floated alongside the scorched remains of a Sarathi dreadnought. They tumbled in a slow, gravityless dance, bumping against one another with dull, soundless thuds that reverberated only through the sensors of the small diplomatic shuttle cutting a path through the wreckage. Captain Jace Rowan sat by the viewport, his reflection ghostly against the glass. He looked tired. It was a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with 10 years of seeing good men and women die for lines on a star map. He adjusted the collar of his dress uniform, which felt stifling compared to his usual flight suit. The fabric scratched at his neck, a constant reminder that he was no longer a squadron commander. He was a liaison, a peacemaker, or, as he suspected, a sacrificial lamb. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "We are approaching the Karsai perimeter. Captain, Sarathi traffic control is demanding our approach vectors for the third time." "Give them the vectors," Jace said, his voice raspy. "Give them whatever they want. We are here to shake hands, not trade fire." He looked down at the datapad resting on his knee. The screen displayed a dossier on the Sarathi Empire. It was a culture built on the bedrock of biological supremacy and martial perfection. They did not have art that did not depict conquest. They did not have music that was not a marching rhythm. To the Sarathi, strength was the only virtue, and weakness was a moral failing punishable by exile or death. Diplomacy, Jace noted with a wry quirk of his mouth, was viewed by their high command as merely a polite prelude to betrayal. The shuttle broke through the final cloud bank, revealing the fortress world of Karsai. It was a brutalist nightmare of black metal and magma vents, a planet that looked like a clenched fist suspended in the void. Orbital defense platforms bristled with kinetic cannons, tracking the small human ship with predatory intent. Jace stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from his trousers. He was a brilliant tactician, known for turning impossible odds into narrow victories. But here, he was just a human, smaller, slower, tragically breakable. The shuttle docked with a metallic clang that vibrated through the floor plates. When the airlock cycled open, the smell hit him first, a mixture of ozone, burnt metal, and something muscular and earthy, like a predatory animal's den. A squad of Sarathi warriors waited in the hangar bay. They were giants, averaging 7 feet in height, encased in carapace armor that looked like it had been grown rather than forged. Their skin was a pale marble gray, etched with faint bioluminescent lines that pulsed with their heartbeats. At the center of the formation stood High Commander Draxath. Draxath was a mountain of a creature, his armor adorned with the skulls of void whales. He looked at Jace as one might look at a mildly interesting insect that had crawled onto a dinner table. "Captain Rowan," Draxath rumbled. The translator device in Jace's ear struggled to capture the subsonic depth of the voice. "The Human Alliance sends us a scholar." Jace stepped forward, keeping his hands visible and empty. "A soldier, High Commander, just like you." Draxath laughed, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. The warriors around him chuckled, a low, chittering sound that made the hair on Jace's arms stand up. "You are small," the commander noted, stepping closer until he loomed over the human. "Your bones look like dry twigs. Is this the best your species can offer to advise us on border security?" "We prioritize leverage over mass," Jace replied, keeping his voice steady despite the primal instinct screaming at him to run. "Leverage," Draxath tasted the word and spat it out. "We shall see. Since you are so fragile, Captain, it would be negligent of me not to provide protection. You will need a bodyguard while you navigate the hazards of Karsai. Jace nodded politely. That is generous of you. Draxath turned to the ranks of his soldiers, his eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. Bring her forward. The ranks parted, not with respect, but with a kind of sneering avoidance. From the back of the formation, a figure emerged. She was small for a Sarathi, perhaps only 6 feet tall, which put her barely eye to eye with Jace. She was slender, lacking the hulking muscle mass of the others. Her armor was standard issue but fit poorly, the shoulder plates slightly too wide, the chest piece scarred and unpolished, but it was her face that caught Jace's attention. Her skin was the color of moonlight on snow, paler than the soldiers around her. Her eyes were large, luminous pools of violet light that seemed too big for her sharp, angular face. Intricate markings swirled down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar, glowing with a soft, erratic pulse. She walked with her head down, her posture stiff, as if bracing for a blow. "This is Nira," Draxath announced, his voice booming across the hangar deck so that every mechanic and deckhand could hear. "She is of the 13th line." Laughter rippled through the hangar. Jace saw a massive Sarathi warrior nudge Nira with his shoulder as she passed, hard enough to make her stumble. She regained her balance instantly but said nothing, her gaze fixed on the floor. She is recorded in our logs as having the lowest combat efficiency rating in this sector. Draxath continued, grinning. She hesitates. She questions. She faints in high-G simulations. Nira stopped in front of Jace. She finally looked up, and the intensity of her violet gaze hit him like a physical force. There was shame there, yes, but beneath it burned a cold, hard ember of defiance. They gave him their weakest warrior as a joke, Draxath said to the room at large, gesturing between the two of them. If he survives the week, we will talk. The hangar erupted in raucous laughter. It was a cruel, sharp sound that echoed off the metal walls. Jace felt the heat rise in his cheeks, not for himself, but for the soldier standing in front of him. He looked at Draxath, then back to Nira. He sensed the insult, the political trap, and the sheer pettiness of it. But as he looked at Nira, he saw her hands clenched into fists at her sides, shaking slightly. Jace forced a smile, sharp and humorless. "I accept," Jace said, his voice cutting through the laughter. Draxath blinked, the mirth fading slightly. "Excellent. Show him to his quarters. Nira, try not to get him killed on the way to the lift." Nira offered a stiff, jerky nod. "Follow me, human," she said, her voice melodic but cold, layered with a harsh rasp that suggested she did not speak much. She turned on her heel and marched away. Jace grabbed his duffel bag and followed, feeling the weight of 100 mocking eyes on his back. The corridors of the Karsai fortress were endless tunnels of black metal and piping, illuminated by harsh red strip lights. The air was thick and humid, smelling of ozone and recycled water. Jace had to jog slightly to keep up with Nira's long, swift strides. "Slow down," Jace called out. "I am not built for the sprint." Nira stopped abruptly, and Jace nearly collided with her back. She turned, her glowing eyes narrowing. "You should not have accepted," she said. Jace adjusted the strap of his bag. "I did not realize I had a choice." High Commander Draxath seemed quite set on the arrangement. "It is a humiliation," she spat, the bioluminescent markings on her neck flashing a brighter blue. "For you, and for me. I am not a bodyguard. I am a combatant. Draxath said you were—" "I know what he said." She cut him off, turning away to punch a code into a door panel. Her movements were sharp, angry. He calls me the weakest warrior. He puts me with the human so that when you die, he can blame my incompetence and avoid a diplomatic incident. Protecting you is a punishment, not an honor. The door hissed open, revealing a Spartan suite of rooms. There was a central common area with a single metal table and two narrow doors leading to sleeping quarters. Jace stepped inside, dropping his bag on the table. Look, Nira, I get it. I am the unwanted guest, and you are the person stuck babysitting him. But we are stuck together. We might as well try to be professional. Nira stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the red light of the corridor. I will do my duty, Captain. I will stand between you and the threats. But do not expect conversation, and do not expect me to be your friend. She stepped inside and the door slid shut, locking them in. I am Jace, by the way, he said, trying to diffuse the tension. I know, she replied, walking to the far corner of the room and standing at parade rest, facing the wall. Right, Jace muttered to himself, rubbing the back of his neck. Good talk. 2 days later, Jace was strapped into the passenger seat of a light reconnaissance skiff, hovering over the jagged obsidian plains of Car-Si's southern hemisphere. Nira was at the controls. Her hands moved over the holographic interface with a fluidity that contradicted Draxath's description of her incompetence. We are approaching Sector 4, Nira said, her voice filtering through the comm system in Jace's helmet. Sensors detect a thermal signature, likely a smuggler hiding in the vents. Let's check it out, Jace said. Nira banked the skiff, diving into a canyon of black rock. The G-force pressed Jace into his seat, but Nira did not seem to flinch. They swept around a spire of rock and found it, a battered cargo hauler, rusting and leaking coolant, tucked into a crevice. A Sarathi male in ragged flight leathers was scrambling over the hull, trying to pry open a maintenance hatch. He froze as the skiff's shadow fell over him. Identify, Nira barked over the external speakers, her ship's cannons locking onto the man. The smuggler raised his hands. I am merely salvaging. This sector is abandoned. He is lying, Nira said to Jace. This is a restricted zone. The penalty for trespassing is death. She charged the plasma cannons. The hum of the weapon buildup vibrated through the hull. The smuggler on the ground fell to his knees, pleading in a dialect Jace did not understand. Nira's finger hovered over the trigger. Jace watched her closely. He saw the hesitation. It was not fear. It was a tremble of reluctance. The man was unarmed. He was pathetic. Nira, Jace said softly. You don't have to do this. He is a criminal, she said. But her voice lacked conviction. He's a scavenger, Jace corrected. Disable his ship. Tag his location for the police drones. Let him live to face a trial. That is not the Sarathi way, Nira whispered. Weakness is... Strength is control, Jace said firmly. Strength is knowing you can kill and choosing not to. For a long moment, the only sound was the whine of the charging cannons. Then, Nira exhaled. She shifted her aim by 2 degrees and fired. The twin bolts of blue plasma shrieked through the air, vaporizing the engine block of the smuggler's ship. The vessel slumped against the rock, dead. The smuggler collapsed face forward, shaking but alive. Target neutralized, Nira reported, her voice flat. As they ascended back out of the canyon, a heavy patrol cruiser passed them. The channel opened, and a harsh voice laughed. We saw that. 13th line. Did you miss, or did you faint before you could pull the trigger? Nira's jaw tightened, her markings flaring a dull, angry red. She did not respond. She cut the comms and accelerated, pushing the skiff's engines to the red line. Jace looked at her profile. Nice shooting, he said quietly. She glanced at him, confusion warring with the anger in her eyes. I failed to execute the target. You stopped the threat, Jace said, and you kept your soul. Where I come from, that counts for something. Nira looked back at the horizon, her grip on the controls loosening just a fraction. It counts for nothing here, she murmured. But for the first time, the self-loathing in her voice sounded less like a fact and more like a question. The attack happened 3 hours after they returned to the outpost. Jace was in the command center, trying to get access to the sector supply logs, while Nira stood guard by the door. The room was bustling with officers tracking routine patrols. Without warning, the main holographic table turned a violent crimson. Perimeter breach, a technician screamed. Multiple contacts. Explosions rocked the foundation of the fortress. The floor lurched, throwing Jace against a console. Sirens began to wail, a dissonant screech that drilled into the skull. Draxath stormed into the room. "Report! Drone swarm!" the technician yelled. They bypassed the outer shields. Their signatures matched Sarathi's stealth tech, but the IFF codes are scrambled. Impossible, Draxath roared. No stealth drive can bypass our sensors. Jace pulled himself up. He looked at the tactical display. The red dots were moving in a chaotic, swirling pattern that looked random, but his tactician's brain saw the underlying algorithm. They were herding the defenders into the central kill box. "They're targeting the shield generators from the inside," Jace shouted. "You need to scramble interceptors now." Silence. "Human," Draxath bellowed. "Guard the door." The wall to their left exploded. Masonry and molten metal sprayed across the room. Jace was thrown backward, his ears ringing. Dust filled the air, choking and thick. Through the haze, he saw sleek, silver drones, shaped like predatory insects, pouring through the breach. They fired rapid pulses of energy that cut down the unarmored technicians. Jace scrambled for cover behind a heavy databank. He looked for Nira. She was standing in the middle of the room, frozen. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated until they were entirely black. Her head twitched to the side, then the other, as if she were listening to a sound no one else could hear. "Nira!" Jace shouted. "Move!" She didn't move. She raised a hand, her fingers splayed. The bioluminescence on her skin strobed rapidly. White, violet, white. 3 seconds, she whispered. "Left flank." She suddenly lunged, crossing the distance between them with impossible speed. She grabbed Jace by the collar of his uniform and yanked him hard to the right, throwing him behind a fallen structural beam. A split second later, a plasma grenade detonated exactly where Jace had been crouching. The heat of the blast singed the air, but they were shielded by the beam. "How did you know?" Jace gasped, checking his sidearm. "I heard them," Nira said, her voice strained. Her eyes were flickering rapidly, tracking invisible flies. "The command frequency, it is screaming in my head." Jace didn't ask questions. He looked over the barrier. The Sarathi warriors in the room were in disarray. Draxath was shouting incoherent rage, firing his heavy caster blindly into the smoke. The drones were flanking them, using the confusion to pick them off. "They need direction," Jace realized. He stood up, ignoring the whizzing plasma bolts. "Form up on the commander," Jace bellowed, his voice projecting with the authority of a veteran officer. "Suppression fire on the breach, Sector 2 and 3, overlapping fields. Move!" The Sarathi warriors, trained to obey authoritative commands, reacted instinctively. They didn't see a weak human. They heard an order that made tactical sense. They snapped into formation, their heavy weapons laying down a wall of green energy that stalled the drone advance. "Cover me!" Jace yelled to Nira. "I am with you," she said. Jace moved, darting from cover to cover, directing the fire. Nira moved with him, but she wasn't looking at the enemy. She was looking at the empty air, her body jerking and weaving before the shots were even fired. She moved like water, sliding around blasts that should have killed her, her rifle snapping up to blast drones out of the air with pinpoint accuracy. She wasn't aiming with her eyes. She was aiming with the data stream. "Behind you," Nira screamed, spinning and firing over Jace's shoulder. A drone that had flanked them disintegrated in a shower of sparks. "Keep pushing," Jace ordered. "Drive them back to the breach." The combined fire of the rallied Sarathi finally overwhelmed the swarm. The last of the drones exploded, and silence, heavy and ringing, descended on the command center. Jace slumped against a wall, his chest heaving. He looked at Nira. She was shaking, her skin gray and ashy, the lights on her body dim and flickering weakly. Blood trickled from her nose. "Jace," she whispered, using his name for the first time. "That was not a pirate raid." "I know," Jace said grimly. The debriefing was a farce. Draxath stood at the head of the table, his armor scorched but his arrogance intact. "A random pirate raid," Draxath declared. "Scavengers using stolen prototype tech. We have driven them off." Jace sat at the end of the table, his datapad linked to the outpost's main server. He was scrolling through the attack logs. "Commander," Jace said, keeping his voice level. "Pirates do not use military-grade synchronized swarm tactics, and they certainly don't have the codes to bypass your perimeter shields without tripping an alarm." "Are you questioning my assessment, human?" Draxath growled. "I am questioning the data," Jace said. "Look at the logs." The moment the attack started, the internal sensors in this sector went offline. Someone turned them off, from inside the command deck. Draxath slammed his fist onto the table, denting the metal. "Glitch in the system." "The raid caused a power surge. The matter is closed. You are dismissed, Captain. Go back to your quarters before you exhaust yourself with this thinking." Jace stared at the High Commander. He saw the flicker of nervousness behind the bluster. He saw the way the other senior officers refused to meet his eyes. "Understood," Jace said coolly. He stood up and walked out. Nira was waiting for him in the corridor. She fell into step beside him. "They are lying," she murmured, barely moving her lips. "Yes," Jace said, "and they are bad at it." Later that evening, Nira vanished for an hour. When she returned to their quarters, she looked pale, her movements agitated. Jace was sitting at the table, dissecting a ration pack. "Where did you go?" "I was listening," she said. She tapped the side of her head, near her temple. "My implants. They are sensitive. Sometimes I pick up secure channels if I am close enough to the emitters." "And?" "I stood near the officer's mess," she said, her voice trembling. "I heard Draxath talking to an advisor, a shadow priest. They were talking about the drones. They said the test was successful. A false flag," Jace realized. "They attacked their own base to test the weapons?" Nira nodded. "But there was more. The advisor asked about me. He asked if the princess problem had been resolved." Jace froze. "Princess problem." Draxath laughed. Nira continued, hugging her arms around herself. He said, "We gave her to the human. Accelerate the schedule. They will both be dead within a month." The room went silent. The air recycler hummed in the background. "They want us dead," Jace said quietly. "It wasn't just a joke. It's an execution." Nira sank into the chair opposite him. She looked small, fragile, stripped of her armor. I thought it was just because I was weak, because I was an embarrassment. But this is something else." Jace reached across the table, but he stopped before touching her hand, remembering her flinch. "Show me your arm," he said gently. "What? You took a plasma burn during the fight. I saw you favoring it." "It is nothing," she said automatically. "Nira, show me." She hesitated, then slowly unclasped the bracer on her left arm. She rolled up the black undersuit sleeve. The skin beneath was angry and blistered, a nasty burn stretching from her wrist to her elbow. Jace stood up and retrieved the medkit from his bag. He sat down next to her, opening a jar of analgesic gel. "This is going to be cold," he warned. He applied the gel. Nira flinched violently at the contact of his warm fingers on her cool skin, her breath hitching, but she did not pull away. "You have gentle hands," she whispered, watching him work. "For a soldier." "I'm a tactician," Jace said, wrapping a sterile bandage around the burn. "I work with maps, not knives." "You took command today," Nira said. "You were not looking at a map. You were shouting orders at high guards who are twice your size, and they listened. They listened because they were scared. And I sounded like I knew what I was doing," Jace said with a slight smile. "It's called the command voice. It's mostly acting." "No," Nira said, shaking her head. "It was strength. But not the kind Draxath talks about." Jace finished the bandage and secured the clip. He looked up, meeting her violet eyes. They were close now, the space between them charged with the adrenaline of the day and the weight of the conspiracy they had uncovered. "You saved my life, Nira," Jace said intensely. "That sensory trick you did, pulling me behind the beam, that wasn't luck, and it wasn't weakness. It is a defect," she said bitterly, looking down at her bandaged arm. "My neural pathways are overactive. I feel things I shouldn't. Electronic signals, emotions, intent. It makes me slow in the simulations because I am overwhelmed by the noise. The instructors call it a sensory malfunction." Jace shook his head. "It's not a malfunction. It's radar. It's empathy. It's a gift, Nira. They just don't know how to use it because it doesn't involve crushing someone's skull." Nira looked at him, her eyes searching his face. She looked vulnerable, a princess hiding inside a warrior's shell, terrified that her disguise was failing. "Being called weak," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It becomes a cage. You hear it enough times, and you stop trying to break the bars. You just sit in the corner and wait to be discarded." "You aren't discarded," Jace said firmly. "You're right here, and we are going to survive this. Both of us." He stood up and walked to the viewport, needing to break the intensity of the moment before he said something reckless. He looked out at the void. The nebula was churning. "Nira, look at this." She stood up and joined him at the window. Outside the station, a strange phenomenon was taking shape, a shimmering curtain of light, like an aurora borealis made of gold and violet fire, was rippling through the vacuum. It moved with a fluid, sentient grace, swirling around the communication spires of the fortress. As Nira stepped closer to the glass, the aurora seemed to pulse. It flared brighter, shifting its color to match the violet of her eyes. Jace looked at Nira. The bioluminescent markings on her neck and face were glowing, not the dull pulse of earlier, but a steady, radiant light that seemed to be answering the storm outside. The rhythm of her skin matched the rhythm of the aurora. "What is that?" Jace asked, unsettled and fascinated. I don't know," Nira breathed, pressing her hand against the glass. "But it feels familiar." She looked at Jace, her face illuminated by the starlight and her own internal glow. She didn't look like a failure. She didn't look like a joke. She looked like something ancient and powerful waking up from a long sleep. Jace Rowan looked at the woman the Empire had thrown away, and he knew, with the certainty of a man who had spent his life reading the turning tides of war, that the weakest warrior was the biggest lie he had ever been told. "We need to be careful," Jace said softly. "Why?" Nira asked, unable to tear her gaze from the storm. "Because," Jace replied, watching the light play across her features, "I think you might be the most dangerous thing on this station." The administrative center of Karsai was a monument to the Sarathi philosophy of bureaucratic violence. It was a windowless room of gray slate and harsh lighting, where petitioners stood for hours without seating, a subtle test of their physical stamina. Captain Jace Rowan had been standing for 4 hours. He leaned against the reception console, trying to ignore the ache in his lower back and the way the Sarathi clerk, a spindly male with 4 cybernetic ocular implants, was pointedly ignoring him. "I am telling you," Jace said, keeping his voice level, "that the telemetry logs from the attack on the command center have been altered. The timestamps do not match the energy signatures. I need to speak with the encryption officer." The clerk did not look up from his screen. "The encryption officer is currently supervising a munitions drill. He is unavailable." Then the duty officer. Jace pressed, "Unavailable. Is there anyone in this entire fortress who is available?" Jace asked, his patience fraying like an old rope. "Or is obstruction of justice a standard operational procedure here?" The clerk finally looked up, his multiple eyes whirring as they focused on Jace. "The attack was resolved human. The official report lists it as a pirate raid. Your persistence is noting a lack of discipline. Do not make me file a citation for insubordination." Jace stared at the clerk, recognizing the brick wall for what it was. It was not incompetence. It was a well-rehearsed script. He pushed off the console, straightening his jacket. "Understood," Jace said dryly. "I would hate to interrupt a munitions drill with something as trivial as the truth." He turned and walked out, finding Nira waiting for him in the corridor. She was leaning against the bulkhead, arms crossed, her face a mask of indifference. But as he approached, her eyes scanned the hallway behind him, checking for threats. "They stonewalled you," she stated. It was not a question. "They built a fortress around the wall," Jace corrected, falling into step beside her. "It confirms everything. They are scrubbing the data because the attack came from inside the house." "You should stop pushing," Nira said quietly, her gaze fixed straight ahead. "In the Sarathi Empire, curiosity is not a virtue. It is a defect. Curiosity gets humans spaced." Jace glanced at her. "Is that a threat?" "Nira, it is a warning," she said. "And perhaps advice. You are annoying, Jace Rowan. But I do not wish to see you floating in the nebula ice because you asked the wrong clerk the wrong question." Jace smiled slightly. "Was that concern I heard?" "Do not read into it," she snapped. Though he noticed the bioluminescent markings on her neck flared a soft, embarrassed pink before she willed them back to neutral blue. Their conversation was cut short as 2 heavy shock troopers intercepted them. "The High Commander requires your presence." One of the troopers grunted. "Immediately." Draxath's office was located at the apex of the fortress, a circular room with a panoramic view of the desolate planetary surface. The High Commander sat behind a desk made of carved volcanic glass, looking like a king on a mountain of obsidian. Ah, the diplomat and his shadow. Draxath boomed as they entered. Jace stood at attention, Nira flanking him perfectly. "High Commander, to what do we owe the pleasure?" Draxath picked up a data slate, tapping it with a clawed finger. "It seems I was too hasty in my judgment of you, Captain. You survived the raid. You even showed a glimmer of tactical competence. Thank you, Jace said, sensing the trap closing around him. However, Draxath continued, his grin widening to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Surviving a chaotic skirmish is one thing. True utility to the Empire requires endurance. We have a patrol route that has gone neglected due to manpower shortages. I am assigning it to you. Jace narrowed his eyes. Which sector? Sector 9. The Echo Rift. A stifled gasp came from the side of the room. Jace looked to see several junior officers snickering, covering their mouths with their hands. Beside him, Nira went rigid, her posture, usually fluid and ready, locked up as if she had been struck. The Echo Rift? Jace repeated. I saw that on the charts. It is classified as a navigational hazard. It is a test of fortitude, Draxath corrected smoothly. Sensors have reported anomalous readings. Smuggler activity, perhaps, or merely atmospheric interference. You will take a patrol skiff, sweep the perimeter, and return. Simple. If it is so simple, Jace asked, why are your officers laughing? Because, Draxath said, leaning forward, the Rift has a habit of swallowing ships that lack conviction. Consider this your final evaluation. Captain, if you return, we will discuss the alliance. If you do not, well, the universe has one less weakling. He dismissed them with a wave of his hand. As they walked to the hangar bay, the atmosphere was heavy. The laughter of the officers followed them down the lift. He is sending us to die, Nira said, her voice hollow. Tell me about this rift, Jace said. It is a wound in space, Nira explained, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her armor. Physics does not work correctly there. Ships vanish. Crews send distress signals that arrive 50 years before they were sent. It is haunted. Jace. They call it the graveyard of sanity. Sounds lovely, Jace said, forcing a bravado he did not feel. Good thing I'm insane. The patrol ship they were assigned was a Wraith-class interceptor. It was sleek, predatory, and clearly had not been serviced in a decade. The hull plates were mismatched, and the cockpit smelled of stale ozone and something that resembled wet dog. Jace climbed into the pilot's seat and immediately groaned. Does your species not believe in cushioning? He asked, shifting uncomfortably on the hard metal slab that served as a chair. This isn't a seat. It's an orthopedic torture device. Comfort breeds complacency, Nira recited automatically, strapping herself into the sensor station behind him. A warrior must remain alert. A warrior must also not have a slipped disc before the battle starts. Jace muttered, running a diagnostic on the console. The engines coughed to life with a reluctant shudder. Jace's hands flew over the controls, reconfiguring the interface from the incomprehensible Sarathi layout to something a human could fly. We are green across the board. Mostly. Jace announced. Thrusters are at 80%. Shields are optimistic. Launching in 3, 2, 1. The Wraith shot out of the hangar bay, blasting past the containment field and into the void. Karsai fell away behind them, a dark marble against the stars. The journey to the Echo Rift took 4 hours at sublight speed. For the first hour, silence reigned. By the second, the cramped confines of the cockpit began to erode the professional barrier. Jace reached into his flight bag and pulled out 2 squeeze tubes. Lunch, he announced, tossing one to Nira. She caught it, examining the gray labeling. Sarathi military ration, nutrient paste, type 4. Jace cracked his open and took a grimace-inducing swallow. It tastes like engine grease mixed with chalk. It is efficient, Nira said, opening hers and consuming it with mechanical indifference. It contains all necessary proteins and electrolytes for combat readiness. You people are tragic, Jace said, shaking his head. You have conquered a dozen star systems and you haven't discovered spices? Flavor is a distraction, Nira said, though he saw a flicker of amusement in her eyes. You humans are obsessed with sensory indulgence. Soft seats, flavored food, it makes you slow. It makes us happy, Jace countered. And a happy soldier fights harder because he has something to live for, like a decent burger. Nira paused, wiping a speck of gray paste from her lip. What is a burger? Jace sighed dramatically. But if we survive this... Nira, I am going to introduce you to the concept of grilled meat and cheese. It will change your life. It might even make you smile. I smile, Nira said defensively. You smirk. Jace corrected. You sneer. Occasionally, you grimace. But I haven't seen a real smile yet. I am a warrior of the 13th line, she said, her tone stiffening again. We do not giggle. I didn't ask for a giggle. Just... Jace gestured vaguely. A sign that you're enjoying the company. Even a little bit. Nira looked at the back of his head. Her bioluminescence shifted to a warm amber, a color Jace hadn't seen before. You talk too much, she said softly. But the noise is better than the silence. Jace grinned at his reflection in the canopy. I'll take that as a compliment. The banter died down as the stars outside began to change. They were approaching Sector 9, the backdrop of the galaxy, usually a comforting tapestry of white points, began to smear. The light stretched and blurred, as if someone had dragged a wet thumb across an oil painting. We are entering the rift periphery, Nira said, her voice tightening. Sensors are erratic. I am reading gravity waves that shouldn't exist. Visuals are getting weird up here, Jace noted. The controls feel mushy, like the ship doesn't want to go forward. Ahead of them, the void tore open. The Echo Rift was not a black hole. It was a kaleidoscope of broken physics. Clouds of violet and bruised orange gas swirled in impossible geometries. Lightning arced between asteroids that floated in retrocausal loops, shattering and reassembling themselves in repeating cycles. It's beautiful, Jace whispered, in a horrifying way. My implants, Nira gasped, clutching her head. What's wrong? The noise, she hissed through gritted teeth. It is not radio static. It is voices, thousands of them. The rift. It echoes everything that has ever died here. Jace looked back. Nira was curled in her seat, hands pressed over her ears, her markings flashing violently. We can turn back, Jace said, reaching for the throttle. No, Nira shouted. If we turn back, Draxath wins. We go through. Just keep talking to me. Anchor me. Jace gritted his teeth and pushed the stick forward. The Wraith plunged into the anomaly. The moment they crossed the threshold, reality dissolved. The cockpit vanished. Jace was no longer sitting in a Sarathi interceptor. He was standing in a wheat field on his home colony of Agrion. The sun was hot on his face. He was 10 years old, and the smoke of burning harvesters choked the air. He felt the crushing weight of fear, the sound of raiders in the distance. Then, the scene shifted. He was in the academy, failing a simulation, the instructor screaming that he was too reckless. Then, the command deck of his first ship, the moment he ordered a retreat that saved his crew but cost him his promotion. The deep, gnawing insecurity that he was a fraud, a man who survived by running away. Jace? Nira's voice cut through the vision, but it wasn't coming from his ears. It was ringing in his mind. Suddenly, the perspective inverted. Jace wasn't seeing his own memories, he was seeing hers. He was walking through a hallway of polished marble. So high the ceiling was lost in shadows. He felt small. He felt the heavy, suffocating fabric of a ceremonial robe. He looked down at his hands, Nira's hands, and they were holding a jagged shard of glass. "Do it," a voice thundered. "Show me you have the stomach for the throne." He looked up and saw the Emperor, not the old, rotting figure on the news feeds, but a younger, terrifying Titan. Beside him, a prisoner knelt, a dissident. "Kill him. Niraya," the Emperor commanded, "or you are no daughter of mine." Jace felt Nira's terror. He felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He felt the overwhelming empathy she tried to suppress, the way she could feel the prisoner's fear as if it were her own. "I cannot," she whispered in the memory. "Then you are nothing," the Emperor spat. "You are weak. You will be scrubbed from the lineage. You will be a foot soldier until you learn to kill without weeping." The vision fractured. Jace saw flashes of her life, the training pits where she held back her blows to avoid hurting sparring partners, the mocking laughter, the isolation. He felt the crushing loneliness of a princess forced to play the pauper, hiding her royal blood to survive a father who wanted to erase her. Jace gasped, snapping back to reality. The cockpit was screaming with alarms. "Nira!" Jace shouted. Nira was slumped over her console, tears streaming down her face, her eyes glowing with a blinding white light. "I saw you," she sobbed, her voice echoing in his head. "The wheat field. You were so afraid. And I saw you," Jace replied, his voice shaking. "The throne room. You're not just a soldier." "Nira! Proximity alert!" Nira screamed, snapping out of the trance as the red lights of the tactical display burned through the mental fog. Jace grabbed the controls. Out of the swirling gas, 3 ships emerged. They were translucent, flickering in and out of phase with reality. Their hulls were ancient Sarathi designs, rotted and skeletal, but their weapons ports glowed with green witchfire. "Ghost ships." Jace swore. "They are automated drones," Nira cried, her hands flying over her sensor board. "Guided by a local AI. They are using the rift's interference to mask their approach." They opened fire. Beams of energy lashed out, not in straight lines, but curving through the distorted gravity. Jace threw the wraith into a corkscrew spin. The ship groaned, metal screaming against the stress. "I can't track them," Jace yelled. "The sensors are garbage in here. Use me," Nira shouted. "What?" "My implants. The rift. I can feel the currents. Connect my neural feed to the navigational computer. That could fry your brain. Do it, Jace, or we die." Jace punched the command override. "Link established." Nira gasped as the ship's sensory data flooded her mind. Her head snapped back, her back arching. But when she spoke, her voice was no longer human. It was a resonant, multi-tonal drone, hard to port, 3 degrees down. Now. Jace didn't hesitate. He yanked the stick left. A green energy bolt sailed past where they had been a microsecond before. "Accelerate. There is a gravity shear ahead. Ride it." Jace slammed the throttle forward when the ship surged, catching a wave of distorted space-time that slingshotted them forward at impossible speed. "Target lock. 2 o'clock. Fire." Jace pressed the trigger blindly. The plasma cannons roared. One of the ghost ships detonated, dissolving into mist. "They're anticipating your logic," Nira's voice screamed in his mind. "Stop thinking like a pilot. Be chaotic. You want chaos?" Jace grinned maniacally, sweat pouring down his face. "I can do chaos." He killed the engines entirely. The wraith tumbled into a freefall. The pursuing ghost ships overshot, confused by the sudden loss of momentum. Jace flipped the ship on its axis, facing backward, and reignited the main thrusters. "Eat this," he yelled, unloading the entire photon torpedo payload at point-blank range. The explosion lit up the nebula like a second sun. The shock waves slammed into the Wraith, sending them spinning into the darkness. Warning. The ship's computer droned. Structural integrity failing, consciousness failing. Jace's vision swam. The G-forces were crushing him. He saw Nira slump forward, her connection severed. "Nira!" he croaked. He reached back, his hand groping blindly in the dark cockpit. He felt her gauntlet. He grabbed her hand, squeezing it with everything he had left. "Hold on," he whispered. "Just hold on." Her fingers tightened around his, a desperate, bone-crushing grip. In the darkness, with the ship tumbling through the haunted void, that contact was the only real thing in the universe. Jace woke to the sound of atmospheric regulators hissing. The ship was drifting, but stable. The view outside was no longer the chaotic rift, but the calm starfield of normal space. They had popped out the other side. He groaned, rubbing his temples. He felt like his brain had been put through a blender. He turned his seat. Nira was awake, staring at her hands. The lights on her skin were dim, pulsing with a slow, exhausted rhythm. "We made it," Jace rasped. Nira looked up. Her eyes were wide, unguarded. For a moment, the warrior was gone completely. "I was inside your head," she whispered, "and I was in yours." Jace said. The silence between them was thick, electric. It wasn't just the shared trauma of combat. It was the intimacy of the mind link. Jace knew how she felt when she was lonely. He knew the specific texture of her fear. And she knew his. "You." Nira started, then stopped. "You know who I am." "I know you are important," Jace said carefully. "I know you walked away from a throne because you wouldn't kill an innocent man." She flinched. "I was weak." "You were brave," Jace said, unbuckling his harness. He spun his chair fully to face her. "In that room, with your father screaming at you. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen." Nira stared at him, her breath hitching. The air in the cockpit felt suddenly hot. They were inches apart, knees brushing. The adrenaline of survival was morphing into something else, a raw, magnetic pull. Jace looked at her lips. He saw her gaze drop to his mouth. Her hand, still trembling, reached out as if to touch his face. "Jace," she breathed. He leaned in. He couldn't help it. The connection between them was a physical tether. Computer. The automated voice cut in, loud and jarring. Incoming transmission. Car-side traffic control. The moment shattered. Nira jerked back as if burned, her armor clattering against the console. Jace squeezed his eyes shut for a second, cursing the timing, then turned back to the comms. "This is Patrol Skiff 9, Jace said, his voice rough, reporting successful navigation of the Echo Rift. Targets neutralized. There was a long pause on the other end. Acknowledged. Skiff 9, proceed to Docking Bay 4. The return was not the triumph it should have been. Jace and Nira stood in the hangar bay, watching the ground crew inspect the scorched hull of their ship. Draxeth did not come down to meet them. Instead, a junior adjutant handed Jace a data slate. Patrol log verified, the adjutant said monotonously. Official record states, routine survey, assistance provided by long-range fleet artillery to disperse navigational hazards. Jace stared at the slate. Fleet artillery? We were alone out there. We took out 3 drone ships with no backup. The record is final, the adjutant said, turning away. Jace wanted to throw the slate at the man's head, but Nira caught his wrist. "Don't," she hissed. "They are rewriting reality. If you argue, you disappear." They walked back to their quarters in silence. The victory had been stolen, the danger trivialized. It was gaslighting on an industrial scale. As they entered the room, Nira's personal comms unit beeped. It was a priority signal, encrypted on a frequency Jace didn't recognize. She tapped the receiver. Her face went drained of color. "What is it?" Jace asked. She looked at the text scrolling across her retinal display. "To Niraya of the Blood. We see you. Your performance in the rift was illuminating. But remember your place. The human is a disease. Stay away from him if you value his life. One accident is tragedy. Two is a pattern." Nira shut off the display with a violent slap of her hand. She turned to Jace, her expression hardening into a glacial mask. "You need to stay away from me," she said coldly. Jace blinked, blindsided. "What? 5 minutes ago we were delirious from neural feedback," she interrupted, stepping back. "It was a mistake. It is a mistake. Nira, look at me. No!" she shouted, backing toward her sleeping quarters. "You are an assignment. Captain. Nothing more. You are a fragile human liaison, and I am the warrior unlucky enough to be stuck with you. Do not confuse survival with affection." Jace felt a flash of anger. He stepped forward, closing the distance. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare retreat into that shell. I was in your head. Nira, I felt it. You don't get to pretend none of that is real. You don't get to pretend you're just a grunt. I am what the Empire says I am," she yelled, but her voice cracked. "You are a liar," Jace said, "and you are scared. But I am not going anywhere." Nira stared at him, her chest heaving. For a second, he thought she might hit him. Instead, she turned and fled into her room, the door hissing shut and locking behind her. Late that night, the station was quiet. Nira stood on the observation deck of the officer's tower, a place she was technically forbidden to be. She stared out at the stars, wrapping her arms around herself. She could still feel the phantom warmth of Jace's hand in hers. She could still feel the shocking clarity of his mind, the humor, the resilience, the way he looked at her and saw her, not the disappointment of the 13th line. She touched the glass. "I am sorry, Jace," she whispered to the empty air. She wanted him. The desire was a terrifying, jagged thing in her chest, but the message had been clear. If she got close to him, they would kill him. To save him, she had to break him. A shadow fell over her. She turned, expecting a guard. It was the Shadow Priest, the advisor she had seen with Draxath. He wore robes of shifting gray smoke. "You look troubled." 13th line, the priest hissed. Nira straightened, assuming the pose of a subordinate. "I am contemplating my duty." "Good. Because the High Commander has a new duty for you." The priest handed her a sealed scroll. "A dignitary is arriving from the core worlds, a member of the Royal Council. You and the human are to escort him to the capital." "The capital?" Nira felt a chill. "Why us?" "Because," the priest smiled, a gesture that did not reach his dead eyes, "you have proven yourselves to be expendable assets. And the journey is long. Many things can happen in the dark between stars." He turned and glided away. Nira looked down at the scroll. It was an honor to escort a dignitary, but in her hands, it felt like a death warrant. They were moving them into the open, away from the border, into the heart of the pit. She looked back at the stars, thinking of the humans sleeping in the room below. "We are going home," she whispered, dread coiling in her stomach, "and I do not think we are meant to arrive." The diplomatic cruiser Gilded Talon was less a warship and more a floating palace designed to intimidate through opulence rather than firepower. Its hull was plated in gold alloy that shimmered against the starlight. and its interior corridors were lined with velvet tapestries depicting the Sarathi Empire's bloodiest conquests. Captain Jace Rowan stood in the center of the grand atrium, clutching a flute of bubbling blue nectar that tasted faintly of ammonia. He felt like a prize hog at a county fair. Around him, the social elite of the Sarathi court, dukes, admirals, and spy masters, circled with predatory grace. They wore robes of spun silk and armor polished to a mirror sheen, their conversations a low hum of gossip and political maneuvering. Jace adjusted his dress uniform. It felt too tight. He was used to the utilitarian flight suits of the Human Alliance, not this ceremonial straitjacket. "Smile, Captain," a passing dignitary murmured, baring sharpened teeth. "You are the guest of honor." Jace forced the corners of his mouth upward. "I am overwhelmed by the hospitality." Standing 2 paces behind him, rigid as a statue, was Nira. She was in full combat gear, her helmet retracted to reveal her face. She held her pulse rifle across her chest, her eyes fixed on the middle distance. To the casual observer, she was a bodyguard. To Jace, who knew the tension radiating off her in waves, she looked like a prisoner waiting for the executioner's axe. He watched the room react to her. It was subtle, but Jace had made a career out of noticing the subtle. A high admiral walked past, glanced at Nira's face, and his step faltered. A duo of court ladies whispering behind fans stopped mid-sentence when they saw the bioluminescent markings swirling on her neck. They didn't look at her with the mockery Jace had seen at the outpost. They looked at her with recognition, and beneath that, a sharp, cold fear. She wasn't just the weakest warrior to these people. She was something else, something they wanted to forget. Jace turned slightly, keeping his voice low enough to be lost under the swelling orchestral music. "You are making them nervous." Nira. Nira did not blink. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her rifle. "They are not nervous," she replied, her voice flat. "They are offended. My presence tarnishes their beautiful floor." "It is more than that," Jace murmured. I saw the Admiral flinch. "You are scaring them. Drop it." "Jace," she warned. A servant approached with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. When he saw Nira, his hands shook so violently the tray rattled. He backed away without offering them anything. Jace watched the servant retreat. He looked at Nira's chin, held high in a defiance that looked exhausting. He remembered the vision in the Echo Rift, the throne room, the shouting emperor, the girl who refused to kill. "We are done here," Jace announced, setting his untouched drink on a passing gravity drone. He grabbed Nira's elbow. She stiffened, but he steered her firmly toward the exit. "Captain, where are you going?" a voice called out. Jace didn't look back. "Strategic retreat. I need to review the arrival protocols." The guest quarters on the Gilded Talon were luxurious, draped in heavy purple fabrics, but Jace checked the room for bugs before he spoke. He pulled a small scrambler device from his boot and set it on the table. It hummed, creating a cone of sonic privacy. Nira stood by the door, refusing to relax. "Why did we leave?" she asked. "That was a breach of protocol." "To hell with protocol," Jace snapped. He turned on her, the frustration of the last few days boiling over. "I am tired of the games, Nira. I am tired of the riddles, and I am tired of watching you shake every time someone looks at you." "I do not shake," she said defensively. "You are vibrating," Jace countered. He stepped closer. "In the rift, I saw things. I saw a palace. I saw you standing before a throne. And then today, I get a message telling me that if I want to live, I need to stay away from Niraya of the blood." Nira went perfectly still, The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That name," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You should not know that name." "Who are you?" Jace demanded. "And don't give me the 13th line speech. I know that's a lie. Who are you really?" Nira looked at him. Her violet eyes, usually so guarded, were wide with panic. She looked at the scrambler on the table, then back at Jace. She seemed to crumble inward, the warrior facade cracking under the weight of the secret she had been carrying. She walked to the window, staring out at the streak of hyperspace stars. "My name is Niraya," she said softly. "I am the third daughter of Emperor Vrax." Jace felt the air leave his lungs. He had suspected she was highborn. He had suspected she was important. He had not suspected she was the daughter of the most powerful tyrant in the galaxy. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. "A princess," he muttered. "I am not a princess," she spat, the anger flaring sudden and hot. "I am a failure. That is what the records say. Princess Niraya died 3 years ago in a shuttle accident. That was the official story. The truth is that she was erased." "Why?" Jace asked. "Because I would not sanction the cleansing of the Othari sector," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "There was a rebellion. The council voted to glass the planet, kill everyone, men, women, children. To make an example." She turned to face him. "My father handed me the activation key. It was my rite of passage. I was supposed to launch the bombardment, to prove I had the strength to rule." "And you refused," Jace said. "I threw the key into the disintegration chamber," Nira said. "I told him that a throne built on ash is just a graveyard with a chair." Jace stared at her. The image was vivid, the small, slender girl standing up to a monster. "He stripped me of my name," Nira continued, tears welling in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "He said if I was so fond of weakness, I could live in it. He had his biosculptors alter my appearance slightly. He suppressed my royal codes. And he assigned me to the 13th line, the fodder, the ones meant to die in the first wave. He made me the weakest warrior so the whole empire could laugh at me while I waited to die." She looked at Jace, bracing herself for his disgust, for the anger of a human who realized he had been lied to. Jace sat there for a long moment. He processed the deception. He processed the danger. But mostly, he processed the cruelty of a father who would do that to his own child. He stood up and walked over to her. "So," he said, a dry, bitter smile touching his lips, "I have been giving orders to a princess this whole time?" Nira blinked, confused by his tone. "Jace." "I made you carry my luggage," Jace said, shaking his head. "That is technically treason, isn't it?" Nira stared at him. "You are joking?" "I am trying to keep from punching a wall," Jace said, his voice dropping, losing the humor. "Nira, what they did to you, it is monstrous. I lied to you," she said. "You survived," he corrected. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He waited until she nodded, a tiny, jerky motion, before he brushed his thumb against her cheekbone, right over the glowing biomarkings. "They call it weakness," Jace said softly. "Mercy, empathy, the refusal to murder children, where I come from, Nira. We call that courage. We call that the only kind of strength that matters." Nira leaned into his touch just for a second, closing her eyes. A shudder ran through her. "I am dangerous to you," she whispered. "The message you received. They know I am slipping the leash. They will kill you to hurt me." "Let them try," Jace said. The air between them hummed. It was thick with unspoken desire, a magnetic pull that had been building since the rift. Jace looked at her lips, parting slightly as her breath caught. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to wrap himself around her and shield her from the entire damn galaxy. He started to lean in. Nira didn't pull away. Her hand came up, resting tentatively on his chest, over his heart. Then the world exploded. The ship lurched violently to the side, throwing them both to the floor. The gravity generators failed instantly, sending the furniture floating, then slammed back on at double strength, pinning them to the deck. Alarms screamed, not the standard alert, but the terrified shriek of a hull breach. Jace scrambled to his feet, hauling Nira up with him. What was that? Nira tapped her temple, her eyes flashing white. Internal dampeners are offline. We have been hit. But the sensors didn't show any ships. The door to their quarters hissed open, but it wasn't a rescue team. 3 figures in stealth suits stood there. They wore no official rank, but their armor bore a jagged sigil Jace had never seen, a Sarathi skull with a cracked crown. Target identified, the leader said, his voice distorted. Secure the girl. Terminate the human. They raised silenced flechette rifles. Move! Jace yelled. He grabbed a heavy decorative vase from a pedestal and hurled it. It smashed into the leader's helmet, shattering into diamond dust. The distraction bought them a second. Jace tackled Nira, rolling them behind the heavy overturned table just as the wall behind them disintegrated under a hail of razor darts. They are inside the ship, Nira shouted, pulling her pulse rifle from her back. Jace drew his sidearm, a heavy kinetic pistol. Who are they? The cracked crown, Nira gasped, firing a burst of plasma over the table. The Purity Guard, my father's secret police, they are not here to arrest us, and they are here to erase the mistake. We need to get to the bridge, Jace said, checking his ammo counter. If they have the bridge, they can vent the atmosphere. We cannot make the bridge, Nira said. Her eyes were darting rapidly, tracking invisible data streams. The saboteurs have locked out the command codes. The captain is dead. The AI has been shackled. Can you unlock it? Jace asked. Nira looked at him. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, regal fury. Yes, she said, but I have to drop the mask. She stood up. She didn't fire. She simply walked out from behind the cover. Nira! Jace screamed, lunging for her. The assassins raised their rifles. Kneel! Nira commanded. It wasn't a shout. It was a sonic weapon. Her voice was layered with a subsonic frequency that vibrated the very bolts of the deck plating. The bioluminescence on her body flared blindingly bright, turning from blue to a searing royal gold. The assassins froze, their armor's servomotors locked up. It was a hard-coded failsafe, buried deep in every piece of Imperial military tech. Absolute obedience to the royal voice. I am Nariah of the Blood, she thundered, walking toward them. Her armor seemed to grow, the light projecting a phantom cloak around her. System, recognize authority override. Code, Alpha Omega 0. The ship's lights flickered and turned a deep, throbbing purple. Authority recognized. The ship's AI boomed, its voice shaking the walls. Welcome back, Highness. Kill them, Nira said, pointing at the assassins. The automated defense turrets in the ceiling dropped down. Before the assassins could reboot their armor, the turrets fired. The 3 figures dropped, smoke rising from their chests. Nira turned to Jace. Her eyes were blazing with power, but her hands were shaking uncontrollably. We have control of the local system, she said, her voice dropping back to normal, sounding breathless. But the saboteurs are in the engine room. They are rigging the core to overload. Jace stared at her. He had seen her fight. He had seen her pilot. But this was different. This was the queen she was supposed to be. Lead the way, Highness, Jace said, grinning fiercely. They ran. The corridors of the Gilded Talon had turned into a war zone. Loyal crew members were fighting the stealth intruders in running gun battles. Smoke filled the air, acrid and blinding. Jace took point, using his smaller size and speed to slide between cover. He moved with the chaotic improvisation of a human guerrilla fighter. He grabbed a fire suppression canister, rigged the timer, and rolled it down a hallway filled with enemies. It detonated in a cloud of freezing foam, immobilizing a squad of purity guards long enough for Nira to pick them off. Nira was the conductor of the violence. She didn't just shoot, she anticipated. 2 on the left. 3 seconds, she would shout, sensing their biosignals through the walls. Jace would pre-fire the corner, dropping the targets before they even stepped into view. Duck, she screamed. Jace dropped flat. A plasma bolt singed the hair on his head. They moved as one organism. Jace covered her blind spots. She cleared his path. The synergy they had found in the rift was back, sharper and more deadly. They weren't just allies. They were 2 halves of a weapon system. They reached the engineering junction. The blast doors were sealing shut. "Hold the door," Jace yelled. Nira reached out with her mind, grappling with the ship's locking mechanism. "I am trying. They are using a hardline override." The doors ground to a halt, leaving a gap 3 feet wide. Jace slid through. Nira followed. Inside the engineering bay, the roar of the unstable core was deafening. A massive column of blue energy throbbed in the center of the room. Standing at the console were 5 saboteurs, frantically typing code. They saw Jace and Nira, for the purity of the blood. The leader screamed, pulling a detonator from his belt. He didn't aim at them. He aimed at the core containment field. "No!" Jace shouted. He raised his pistol and fired. The shot took the leader in the shoulder, spinning him around. The detonator flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. The other 4 saboteurs opened fire. Jace dove behind a cooling vent. He popped up, firing a double tap that dropped one, but they were pinned. The volume of fire was too heavy. "Nira, I need a path," Jace yelled over the comms. "I can overload the lighting array," she replied. "It will blind them for 2 seconds. Do it." The overhead lights flared with the brightness of a supernova, then shattered. The room plunged into darkness, lit only by the pulsing blue core. Jace moved. He didn't need to see. He had memorized their positions, and he fired 3 times. 3 bodies hit the floor. "Clear!" Jace shouted. He moved toward the console to cancel the self-destruct sequence. "Jace, wait!" Nira's voice was a panicked scream. He spun around. The leader, the one he had shot in the shoulder, was on the ground. He was holding a secondary weapon, a disruption cannon, heavy and unstable. He was aiming at Jace's back. Jace tried to bring his gun up, but he knew he was too slow. He saw the barrel glow green. Then a blur of motion slammed into him. Nira threw herself across his body. The cannon fired. The sound was a wet, sickening tear. The blast hit Nira square in the backplate. It didn't burn. It disrupted the molecular bonds of her armor and the flesh beneath. Nira was lifted off her feet and slammed into Jace, knocking him backward into the console. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs. Silence returned to the room, save for the hum of the core. "Nira?" Jace gasped. He pushed himself up. Nira was lying on top of him. She wasn't moving. "Nira." He rolled her off him gently. The front of her armor was intact, but when he touched her back, his hand came away wet with a silvery blue fluid. Her blood. She coughed, a terrible rattling sound. Her eyes fluttered open, but the violet light was dimming, flickering like a dying bulb. Did we win?" she whispered, blood bubbling past her lips. Jace's heart stopped. He looked at the wound. The disruption blast had shredded the biocircuitry along her spine. Her suit was trying to seal the breach, but the damage was too catastrophic. "Stay with me," Jace commanded, his voice cracking. "Do not you dare die on me." He looked around. The blast doors had sealed completely. The comms were dead. The air in the room was getting thin. The blast had ruptured a seal. "Help!" Jace screamed at the empty room. Medical assistance unavailable. The AI droned. Containment breach in Sector 4. "I have to fix this," Jace said, panic clawing at his throat. He looked at Nira. She was fading. Her skin was turning a translucent gray. "Jace," she wheezed, "it is cold." He ripped off his jacket, bundling it under her head. He scanned the engineering bay. There, a maintenance kit for the cybernetic drones. It had biogel and fusion sutures. He grabbed the kit and slid back to her. "I am going to have to take the armor off." "Nira," Jace said, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the laser cutter. "I need to get to the wound." "Do it," she breathed. He worked frantically. He cut through the melted ceramite of her backplate. He stripped away the black undersuit, exposing the pale skin of her back. The wound was a nightmare of torn flesh and sparking wires where her implants had been severed. Jace swallowed the bile in his throat. He wasn't a doctor. He was a soldier. He knew how to break things, not fix them. "Guide me," Jace pleaded to the ship's AI. "Engineering protocol. Cybernetic repair. Target identified. Biomechanical interface." The AI responded. "Reconnect nodes 4 through 9. Apply conductive gel." Jace's hands were slick with her alien blood. He reached into the wound. Nira screamed. It was a raw, animal sound of agony that tore through Jace's soul. "I am sorry. I am sorry," he wept, finding the severed nerve clusters. He clamped them together with the fusion sutures. "Hold on. Nira, please." He pressed the biogel into the tear. It sizzled, sealing the flesh and cooling the overheated circuitry. Nira gripped his arm. Her nails dug into his skin, drawing blood. But he didn't feel it. He was focused entirely on the faint, erratic pulse under his fingers. He worked for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. He reconnected the power flow. He sealed the tissue. Finally, the sparking stopped. The wound began to knit together, the advanced Sarathi biology taking over where his crude surgery ended. Nira slumped against the floor, unconscious. Jace collapsed beside her, gasping for air. His hands were covered in blue blood. He stared at her chest. Rise and fall, rise and fall. She was breathing. He checked the console. The self-destruct was canceled. The ship was stabilizing. He crawled back to her. He brushed the hair from her sweat-slicked forehead. "Nira," he whispered. Her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, they opened. The violet light was weak, but steady. "You," she rasped. "You have terrible bedside manner." Jace let out a laugh that sounded like a sob. "I did my best." He leaned over her, checking her pupils. She looked up at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving them both raw and exposed. She was half naked, her armor stripped away, her body marked by his desperate surgery. He was covered in her blood. The barrier between them was gone. There was no protocol left, no rank. Just two people who had almost lost the only thing that mattered. Jace looked at her mouth. He didn't think. He didn't weigh the political consequences. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle movie star kiss. It was desperate. It was trembling and fierce and tasted of blood and ozone. He pressed his lips to hers, pouring all the fear and gratitude of the last hour into the contact. Nira made a small sound in her throat. She didn't push him away. Her hand came up, tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with a hunger that matched his own. She opened to him, letting him in, letting herself want him without the mask, without the crown, without the shame. For a long minute, the burning ship didn't exist. The war didn't exist. There was only the heat of her skin and the desperate pressure of her mouth on his. They broke apart, gasping, foreheads resting against each other. Jace's hands were framing her face. Nira's fingers were clutching the collar of his uniform. "You are alive," Jace whispered, his voice wrecked. "Because of you," she answered softly. They stayed there for a moment, breathing each other's air. Then, the reality of the universe crashed back in. The hum of the ship, the bodies of the assassins, the destination awaiting them. Nira pulled back slightly, wincing as her healing back stretched. "Jace," she said, her eyes searching his. "We cannot." "This, I know," Jace said, though it felt like cutting out his own heart. "The capital. If they know we are like this, if they know you are my weakness, they will use you to break me." "Then we don't let them know," Jace said firmly. He helped her sit up, supporting her weight. "In public, I am the liaison. You are the escort. But in here," he tapped his chest, "in here, you are mine, and I am yours." Nira looked at him, and for the first time, she smiled, a real smile. It transformed her face, making her look younger, softer, and infinitely more dangerous. "Agreed," she said. The gilded Talon limped into the orbital dock of the Sarathi capital 3 days later. The damage to the hull had been cosmetic. The damage to the crew was severe. Jace and Nira stood at the airlock. Nira was back in her armor, polished and pristine, hiding the scars beneath. Jace stood at her shoulder, his uniform pressed, his face a mask of diplomatic neutrality. The airlock hissed open. A ramp extended down to the Grand Plaza. It was a breathtaking sight. Spires of crystal and black iron pierced the purple sky. Thousands of Sarathi citizens and soldiers were gathered in the plaza, a sea of gray and neon. At the base of the ramp stood a delegation, counselors, admirals, and at the center, a man who looked like an older, crueler version of Draxath. "The Welcome Committee," Jace murmured, barely moving his lips. "They are smiling," Nira noted. "That means the knives are out," Jace said. Nira straightened her spine. She looked at the city that had exiled her. She looked at the people who wanted her dead. Then, she glanced sideways at Jace. She didn't touch him, but he felt the brush of her mind against his, a silent pulse of reassurance. "Ready?" Her voice echoed in his head. Jace stepped forward, matching her stride. "Always," he replied. Together, the human captain and the alien princess walked down the ramp, stepping into the arena where the real war was just beginning. The imperial palace of Ethelgard was not a building. It was a mountain of crystal and black iron carved into the shape of a predator's fang. It pierced the violet sky of the capital, casting a long, jagged shadow over the city below. Inside, the air smelled of spiced incense and ozone, a cloying mixture that failed to mask the underlying scent of stagnation. Captain Jace Rowan stood in the Great Hall of Audience, a cavernous space large enough to dry dock a battleship. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the thousands of Sarathi nobles, officers, and data priests gathered in silence. They were a sea of gray skin and shifting bioluminescence, their eyes fixed on the dais at the far end of the hall. Jace felt the weight of every gaze. He was the only human in the room, a speck of beige in a monochrome world. He stood at attention, his dress uniform feeling like a target, watching the figure kneeling before the throne. Nira. She was not dressed in the silks of a princess. She wore her combat armor, the scorched plates from the gilded Talon replaced with pristine, ceremonial ceramic. Her helmet was off, tucked under her arm. Her head was bowed, exposing the intricate, glowing markings on her neck to the man sitting on the throne. Emperor Vrax looked less like a father and more like a geological formation. He was immense. His armor fused directly into his flesh, tubes of glowing nutrient fluid pumping through his chest. His face was a mask of ancient, scarred leather, and his eyes were burning coals of malice. "Rise, warrior of the 13th line," Vrax rumbled. His voice did not echo, it simply crushed the air in the room. Nira stood. She moved with a grace that made the heavy armor look like gossamer. But Jace saw the tremor in her hands. She kept her chin high, staring straight ahead, refusing to look at her father. "You have returned from the border," Vrax continued, his gaze sliding over her like a physical touch. "We are told you displayed utility. We are told you remembered, briefly, what it means to be Sarathi." "I did my duty, High Emperor," Nira replied. Her voice was steady, magnified by the hall's acoustics. "Duty," Vrax mused, a strange word coming from the mouth of one who once threw away her birthright for the sake of sentiment. A ripple of uneasy laughter moved through the court. Jace clenched his fists at his sides. It was a public flaying. Vrax was reminding everyone that she was broken before he deigned to fix her. "However," Vrax said, leaning forward, "the Empire is not without mercy. For your service in the Echo Rift, and for your escort of our guest, we grant you clemency." He raised a hand. A drone descended from the ceiling, carrying a badge of rank. "We reinstate you to the active roster," Vrax announced, "not as a daughter, not as a royal heir, but as a warrior of the Vanguard. You have proven you can kill. Do not disappoint us again by discovering a conscience." Nira took the badge. It was a heavy iron disc. She clasped it against her chest plate. "I serve the Empire," she recited, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Vrax smiled. It was a terrifying expression, devoid of warmth. "Then go. The festivities await." The court erupted into polite applause. The tension broke, replaced by the hum of conversation. Jace watched as Nira turned and walked back toward him. Her face was a mask of stone, but through the bond that still lingered faintly between them, he felt a wave of nausea and humiliation so potent it nearly brought him to his knees. As the crowd dispersed toward the banquet halls, Jace scanned the room. He had spent a lifetime reading battlefields, and this ballroom was no different. He saw a group of admirals clustered near a pillar, speaking in low tones and glancing at their chronometers. He saw data priests exchanging encrypted slates with masked counselors. The air thrummed with conspiracy. They weren't just gossiping. They were coordinating. The coup wasn't a future event. It was already running in the background, a countdown clock ticking toward zero. Jace fell into step beside Nira as they exited the hall. "That was warm," Jace muttered. "He seems like a hugger." "Do not," Nira whispered harshly. "Do not make jokes. Not here." She led him away from the main procession, ducking into a service corridor lined with cooling pipes. Once they were out of sight, she sagged against the wall, the iron badge slipping from her fingers and clattering to the floor. "He denied me," she breathed, her eyes squeezing shut. "He reinstated me as a grunt to show the court that I am nothing. I am just a weapon to be pointed." "He is terrified of you," Jace said quietly, picking up the badge. Nira opened her eyes. "He is the Emperor. He fears nothing. He fears what you represent," Jace corrected. "He saw the way the court looked at you. You aren't the weakest warrior anymore, Nira. You are the one who walked out of the Echo Rift. You are the one who saved the Gilded Talon. He is trying to put you back in a box before you realize you are bigger than the box." Nira looked at him, and for a moment, The mask slipped. She looked young and desperately tired. "It does not matter what I am," she said. "I picked up a signal during the ceremony. My implants. They are attuned to the command frequency." "What did you hear?" "A data packet transfer," she said, tapping her temple. "High-level encryption. It was routed to the deep archives beneath the palace. The header was Purity Protocol." Purity Protocol," Jace repeated, a chill running down his spine. "That is what the conspirators mentioned on the outpost." "We have to know what it is," Nira said, pushing herself off the wall. "The reception is tonight. The guards will be distracted. If we are going to move, we move now." The data catacombs of the Imperial Palace were a city beneath a city. Miles of server banks stretched into the darkness, cooled by liquid nitrogen that rolled across the floor in heavy white fog. The only light came from the pulsing blue veins of the data conduits. Jace and Nira moved through the shadows. Nira had reactivated her stealth protocols, her armor dampening their footsteps. Jace relied on old-fashioned tradecraft, moving only when the sweeping security scanners looked away. "This place gives me the creeps," Jace whispered. "It feels like walking inside a giant brain." "It is," Nira replied softly. "This is the memory of the Empire. Every battle, every law, every execution. It is all stored here." They reached a terminal junction, a massive console shaped like a darkly glowing obelisk. Nira placed her hands on the interface. Her bioluminescence flared, syncing with the machine. "I am in," she murmured, navigating to the restricted partition. Jace stood guard, watching the corridor. He glanced back at her. The blue light of the console illuminated her face, making her look ethereal. "You are good at this," he said, "for a grunt." "I told you," she said, her fingers dancing over the holographic keys. "I listen." She froze, her breath hitched. "What?" Jace asked, stepping closer. "What is it?" She didn't answer. She swiped her hand, projecting the data into the air above the console. It was a map of the galaxy. Red zones were highlighting entire sectors, human colonies, trade routes, and even Sarathi worlds known for descent. "The Purity Protocol," Nira read, her voice shaking. "It is not a border security plan. It is a cleansing algorithm." Jace stared at the projection. The numbers scrolling on the side were population estimates. Billions. "They are targeting the genetic outliers," Nira whispered. "Humans, mixed species colonies, Sarathi lineages that show weakness or mutation." Jace pointed to a line of code at the bottom. "What is that source? Who is issuing the order?" "It's not Vrax." Nira frowned, digging deeper into the file. "It is authorized by the Dominion Corps." "The Dominion Corps?" Jace asked. "It is a legend," Nira said, her face pale. "An ancient AI from the founding of the Empire. We were told it was deactivated 1,000 years ago because it became too radical. It believed that for the Sarathi to survive, all other variables must be eliminated. It wasn't deactivated," Jace realized. "It was buried. And someone woke it up." Nira expanded the schematic. "It is not just awake, Jace. It is integrated. Look, the core is fused with the central command grid. It has been learning, evolving. The counselors, they are not controlling it. They are worshipping it. They are feeding it data to validate its genocide model." "We have to shut it down," Jace said, reaching for his sidearm. "Where is the mainframe?" "It is here," Nira said, pointing to a spire on the map, "the shrine of the first. It is a restricted sanctuary at the apex of the palace." "But Jace, we cannot just shoot it. It is distributed software. If we destroy the terminal, It will just jump to a fleet server. We have to kill the logic, that we have to corrupt the data stream from the inside. How? Nira looked at him. Her expression was a mix of fear and a strange, desperate resolve. We have to bond, she said. Bond? You mean like the mind link in the rift? Deeper, Nira said. The Dominion core is protected by biometric firewalls. It will kill any single mind that tries to enter. But two minds synced in perfect resonance. We could create a feedback loop. We could force it to process empathy. It would crash the logic matrix. Jace looked at her. He remembered the feeling in the rift, the terrifying openness of it. You are talking about the Sarathi soul binding, aren't you? Jace asked. I read about it in the briefing. It is forbidden for non-mates. It is forbidden because it is dangerous, Nira said, stepping closer to him. There are no barriers. Jace, no secrets. If we do this, I will see everything, every shame, every fear, every time you looked at me and wanted something you shouldn't, and you will see the same in me. Jace looked down at her hands. They were trembling. We barely survived the rift, he said. We had no choice in the rift, she countered. This time, we have to choose it. She looked up at him, her violet eyes searching his face. I cannot do it alone. Jace, I am not strong enough. Jace reached out and took her hand. His thumb traced the scars on her knuckles. You are the strongest person I know, he said softly. But you are right. You shouldn't have to be alone. He squeezed her hand. Let's go break a god, he said. The shrine of the first was a chamber of glass and starlight located at the very top of the palace spire. The ceiling was open to the void, separated only by a shimmering energy field. In the center of the room stood a massive crystal monolith, pulsing with a dark, rhythmic heartbeat. This was the interface for the Dominion core. The room was silent, cold, and holy in a way that made Jace's skin crawl. Nira walked to the monolith. She began to strip off her gauntlets, then the heavy shoulder plates. We need skin contact, she explained, her voice barely a whisper. The biocircuitry needs to complete the circuit through us. Jace unbuttoned his dress jacket and threw it on the floor. He rolled up his sleeves. He felt exposed, and not just because of the cold air. They stood on opposite sides of the crystal, facing each other. Place your hands on the interface, Nira instructed, and look at me. Do not look away, no matter what happens. Jace placed his palms on the warm, vibrating surface of the crystal. Nira did the same. Her fingers were spread wide, pressing against the glass. Ready? She whispered. No, Jace said honestly, but do it anyway. Nira closed her eyes. The bioluminescence on her body flared, not blue, not gold, but a blinding, pure white. Initiate, she commanded. The world dissolved. It wasn't like the rift. The rift was chaos. This was a tidal wave. Jace gasped as the sensation hit him. It wasn't pain. It was existence, amplified by a factor of 1,000. He felt the cold floor beneath his feet, but he also felt the floor beneath Nira's feet. He felt his own heart beating, and he felt hers, skipping in a frantic rhythm that matched his own. Then the walls came down. He fell into her. He saw her childhood, not as a movie, but as a memory. He felt the cold stone of the palace floor against his knees as he begged his father for approval. He felt the crushing weight of the helmet the first time he put it on. He felt the burning shame of the name weakest warrior. But beneath the shame, he felt the desire. He felt the moment she first saw him in the hangar. The surprise that he was so small and the immediate, confusing curiosity. He felt the shock of his hand on her arm in the quarters, the warmth that she had craved for years. He felt the echo rift, the terrifying comfort of his mind. And he felt the love. It was terrifyingly vast. She loved his humor because it was a shield. She loved his stubbornness because it anchored her. She wanted him, not as a political ally, not as a friend, but as a man. She wanted his hands on her skin, his voice in her ear, his body against hers to keep the cold of space away. Jace. Her voice whispered in his mind, raw and weeping. I am so sorry you have to see this. And then she was in him. She felt his loneliness. The soldier who had fought for 10 years and never found a home. She felt the way he used sarcasm to hide how terrified he was of failing her. She saw the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't looking, with a reverence that made her soul ache. She heard the thought he had never spoken. She is the queen I would die for. She is the woman I would live for. The feedback loop screamed higher. The distinction between Jace and Nira began to blur. They were just us. Tears streamed down Jace's face in the real world. He was laughing, a shaky, hysterical sound. You think I'm arrogant? He sent to her. You are, she sent back, her mental voice thick with emotion. But you are right. I love you. The thought formed between them, simultaneous, originating from nowhere and everywhere. I love you. It was unbearable. It was perfect. Then the Dominion Corps noticed them. The red light of the monolith spiked. The AI screamed. It was a digital screech of outrage. Impurity detected, a contamination. The visions shifted. The Corps attacked. Jace saw Nira dying. He saw her executed by Vrax, her head rolling across the obsidian floor. He felt the grief of it, a physical blow to his gut. Let go, the Corps whispered. She is dead. You failed. Nira saw Jace in an airlock. She saw the door open. She watched him sucked out into the void, his eyes freezing, his lungs rupturing. He is weak. The Corps hissed. He is dust. Let him go. The psychic pressure was immense. It was trying to sever the bond by driving a wedge of trauma between them. Jace groaned, his knees buckling. The image of Nira's death was so real. Jace. Nira's voice cut through the nightmare. It is a lie. Look at me. Jace forced his eyes open in the real world. He looked through the crystal. Nira was there. She was crying, her face twisted in pain, but she was looking right at him. I am here, Jace projected, shouting the thought with every ounce of will he possessed. I refuse to be the man who watches you die. I choose him. Nira screamed into the interface. I choose him over the crown. I choose him over the empire. I choose him. The combined force of their defiance, the sheer, irrational, beautiful weight of their human and Sarathi emotion, slammed into the AI's logic matrix. The Corps couldn't process it. It understood variables. It understood hate. It did not understand self-sacrifice without gain. It did not understand love that defied survival instinct. Error, the Corps shrieked. Predictive model invalid. Causality breach. The red light fractured. The monolith cracked. A spiderweb fracture ran down the center of the crystal. Data flooded their minds. They saw the names. Admiral Krell, High Priest Zul. They saw the false flag attack planned for the planetary festival in 2 days. They saw the launch codes for the Purity Protocol. We have it, Nira gasped. Break the link. They pulled their hands away. The force of the separation threw them backward. Jace hit the floor hard, sliding across the glass. Nira collapsed on the other side. The room was silent again, save for the heavy, jagged breathing of two people who had just been inside each other's souls. Jace pushed himself up. His head was spinning. He looked across the room. Nira was staring at him. He could still feel her. It wasn't the overwhelming flood of the ritual, but a hum in the back of his mind. He knew she was in pain. He knew she was relieved. He knew she loved him. The bond hadn't broken. It had settled. They are linked, Jace realized. Permanently. Nira crawled toward him. He met her halfway. They didn't speak. They just grabbed each other, holding on as if gravity had stopped working. "We beat it," Jace whispered into her hair. "We beat the god. We have the evidence." Nira sobbed, clutching his shirt. "We can stop the war." The door to the shrine blew inward. The explosion sent them tumbling apart. Debris rained down. Through the smoke, figures emerged, not purity guards this time. These were Imperial Praetorians. And leading them was High Commander Draxath. Draxath looked at the cracked monolith, then at the two of them huddled on the floor. He smiled, a slow, reptilian baring of teeth. "How convenient," Draxath rumbled. "We catch the traitors in the act of sabotaging the sacred archives." He gestured. 4 guards lunged forward. Jace scrambled for his pistol, but a heavy boot slammed into his wrist, shattering the bone. He cried out, and across the room, Nira screamed, clutching her own wrist as the phantom pain hit her. "Jace," she yelled, trying to summon her biotics. Draxath was faster. He slapped a metal collar around her neck. It hummed with dampening energy. Nira's bioluminescence went dark instantly. She collapsed, gasping, cut off from her power. Corrupt intimacy. Draxath sneered, looking between them. Bonding with an alien. It is perversion of the highest order. "Get your hands off her!" Jace shouted, struggling as 2 guards hauled him up. "Take the human to the Black Site transport," Draxath ordered. "He will be a useful hostage until the fleet is in position. Then, flush him." "No!" Nira screamed. She fought against the collar, clawing at the guards. Draxath backhanded her. She fell, blood trickling from her lip. Jace felt the blow. His own head snapped back. "Don't touch her!" Jace roared. The guards dragged him toward the door. He dug his heels into the floor, fighting for every inch. His eyes locked on Nira. "Nira, listen to me!" Jace yelled as they dragged him into the corridor. "I'm still with you. Can you hear me? I'm still with you." Nira lay on the floor of the shrine, surrounded by guards. She reached out, her hand grasping at the empty air. The dampener collar made her mind feel like it was wrapped in cotton, cold and suffocating. But deep in the silence, faint and terrified, she heard him. "I'm here, Nira, I'm here." She watched them drag him into the darkness. She was colder than she had ever been in her life. She was the weakest warrior again, stripped of her light, stripped of her weapon. But as the tears fell on the cold glass floor, she held on to that single thread of thought like a lifeline in a storm. "I am coming for you," she promised silently, the rage building in her gut, hotter and darker than any star. "And I am going to burn this entire empire to the ground to get you back." The detention facility known as the Oubliette did not orbit a planet. It hung in the gravity well of a dying red dwarf star, a churning ball of fire that filled the viewports with the color of dried blood. The heat shielding of the station groaned constantly, a sound like a dying animal that never quite finished dying. Captain Jace Rowan hung by his wrists from the ceiling of Interrogation Cell 4. His face was a map of bruises and his left leg was dragging, the bone he had broken in the shrine throbbing with a dull, sickening rhythm. A Sarathi correction officer, a spindly creature with surgical implants replacing his lower jaw, circled him. "It is a simple script, human," the officer rasped, his voice synthesized and metallic. "You will record a confession. You will state that you used chemical pheromones to seduce the warrior Nira. You will state that you manipulated her weak mind to steal state secrets." Jace spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor. "My motivation is suffering," Jace wheezed, forcing a grin that split his lip. I just wasn't getting enough torture in the human alliance. I heard the service here was 5 stars. The officer struck him across the ribs with a shock baton. The electricity seized Jace's muscles, turning his body into a rigid line of agony. He gasped, swinging helplessly as the current faded. "She has abandoned you," the officer said, leaning close. "She is in the palace, negotiating her reinstatement. She has forgotten the pet human." Jace closed his eyes. He reached out into the dark, not with his hands, but with the new sense that had been burned into his brain in the shrine of the first. He felt for the hum in the back of his skull. It was there, faint, distant, but real. Cold, he felt, silk against skin, nausea, fear. Then a sudden spike of warmth, a pulse of recognition. Jace. It wasn't a word. It was a sensation. It was the feeling of a hand squeezing his in the dark. It was a promise. "She hasn't forgotten anything," Jace whispered to the officer. "And neither have I." Light years away, in the emerald suite of the Imperial Palace, Nira stood before a mirror. She was dressed in a gown of woven silver, heavy and suffocating. Her armor was gone. Her weapons were gone. The dampener collar was still around her neck, a choker of black metal that suppressed her bioluminescence, leaving her skin a dull, lifeless gray. High Admiral Krell stood behind her. He was one of the key conspirators, a man who smelled of expensive cologne and rot. "You look radiant, Highness," Krell said, his reflection leering at her. "The wedding will be the highlight of the season, a symbol of unity to calm the unrest." "It is a cage," Nira said, her voice flat. "It is survival," Krell corrected. "Your father is disappointed, but he is pragmatic. Marry me. Denounce the human as a manipulator, and you retain your title. Refuse, and the purity protocol wipes out the human sector, including the prison where Captain Rowan is currently being disassembled." Nira stared at her reflection. She felt the panic rising in her throat. She felt Jace's pain echoing in her mind, the sharp sting of electricity, the ache in his broken wrist. "Hold on," she projected, focusing all her will on the bond. "Do not break. Never." The echo came back, laced with a jagged, defiant humor. "I am just getting started." Nira turned to Krell. Her face was composed, the mask of the princess perfectly in place. "I will require access to the communication grid," she said, "to arrange my trousseau. There are specific fabrics that must be ordered from the outer colonies." Krell laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Vanity. I am glad to see you have finally embraced your station. You shall have a terminal, but it will be monitored." Nira offered him a cold, thin smile. "Of course, Admiral. I have nothing to hide." 2 days passed in the oubliette. Jace was thrown back into the general holding cell, a pit of misery housing the refuse of the Empire. He landed on the metal floor with a groan. "You look like recycled slag. Human," a voice croaked. Jace rolled over. A massive Sarathi sat in the corner. He was missing an eye, and his armor was stripped down to rags. But his size was intimidating. "Thank you," Jace rasped. "I try to maintain a certain aesthetic." The Sarathi laughed, a rumble that shook the floor. "I am Vrock, former shock trooper. I punched an officer who told me to shoot civilians. I am Jace," Jace said, dragging himself to a sitting position. "I punched a god, technically." Vrock grinned, revealing broken teeth. "I heard. The human who bonded with the traitor princess. You are famous in here, little man." A skinny human slid out from the shadows. He had the shifty eyes of a career criminal. "Famous ain't the word," the human muttered. "Valuable is the word." I'm Silas, smuggler. If half the rumors are true, you're the key to a lot of locked doors. Jace looked at them. He saw the desperation, but he also saw the spark of rebellion. I need a terminal, Jace said. Silas snorted. This is a black site. There ain't no internet cafes. There is a maintenance port behind that panel, Jace said, pointing to a rusted grate near the waste disposal. I saw the schematics in the shrine before they dragged me out. It connects to the environmental control loop. Vrock looked at the grate, then at Jace. If I rip that open, the guards will come. If you rip that open, Jace corrected, I can bring the walls down. Vrock considered this. Then he cracked his knuckles. I hate guards. In the palace, Nira moved with the precision of a ghost. The terminal Krell had given her was monitored. Yes. But the monitors were looking for outgoing messages to the human alliance. They were not looking for low-frequency bursts sent to retired service bands. Nira was contacting the old guard, veterans of the 13th line who had been discarded like her. Warriors who remembered that she had saved their lives in the border skirmishes while the High Command drank wine in the capital. She encoded the data from the Dominion Corps into a pattern of textile orders. Silk from Sector 4 meant genocide planned for Sector 4. Gold thread count 0 meant no survivors. She sent the messages, and then she waited for the echo. It came back 12 hours later. A subtle shift in the palace guard rotation. A nod from a servant who bore the scars of a veteran. We are ready. The message was silent, conveyed only by the placement of a flower vase in her room. Nira stood up. It was time for the assembly. The Imperial Assembly Hall was a coliseum of politics. Thousands of delegates sat in tiered rows. The air was thick with the smell of anticipation. Nira stood at the podium. She wore the silver dress, but she stood like she was wearing power armor. Krell stood by her side, a hand possessively on her shoulder. Daughter of Vrax. Krell announced to the cameras broadcasting to the entire Empire to speak your truth. Nira stepped forward. She looked into the lens. She felt the eyes of billions on her. Now. Jace. She sent through the bond. Now. In the oubliette. Jace's fingers flew across the wires of the exposed maintenance port. Silas held the wires together while Vrock stood at the cell door, holding off 3 guards with nothing but his fists and a stolen tray. Uploading the payload, Jace shouted. Nira took a breath. They call me the weakest warrior, she said, her voice clear and ringing. The hall went silent. They call me this because I refuse to burn a city. They call me this because I refuse to be a butcher. Krell frowned. This is not the script, he hissed. Nira ignored him. She looked straight at the camera. But I have learned something. Strength is not the ability to kill. Any coward can kill. Strength is the courage to stand between the weak and the monster. Strength is protection. Cut the feed, Krell shouted, lunging for the console. But the feed did not cut. Instead, the massive holographic screens above the assembly flickered. The image of Nira was replaced by the map Jace and Nira had stolen from the catacombs. The Purity Protocol. Red zones lit up the galaxy. The casualty numbers scrolled in spoken word. 7 billion, 12 billion, total eradication. This is what they call purity, Nira screamed, her voice shaking the walls. They do not want to secure the Empire. They want to turn it into a graveyard. The hall erupted. Counselors were shouting. Admirals were drawing weapons on each other. Krell grabbed Nira by the throat. You little traitor. Nira didn't flinch. She grabbed his wrist. Execute, she thought. In the oubliette. Jace pressed the final wire connection. The virus they had seeded in the Dominion core, the chaotic, emotional feedback loop of their bond, went live. The lights in the assembly hall turned a violent, flashing red. The automated defense drones, controlled by the core, suddenly spun in circles, confused by the conflicting logic commands. Krell's personal shield flickered and died. Nira headbutted him. It was a vicious, unprincess-like blow that shattered his nose. Krell staggered back, blood spraying. Nira ripped the dampener collar from her neck. The lock disengaged as the global security grid rebooted. Her bioluminescence flared to life, blindingly bright. Praetorians. Nira commanded, her royal voice amplified by the chaos. Arrest the conspirators, they are enemies of the blood. Half the guards hesitated. The other half, the old guard veterans she had signaled, turned their weapons on Krell and his allies. Nira grabbed a fallen shock baton. She turned to the camera, which was still broadcasting. "The Dominion core is vulnerable," she shouted to the galaxy. "Every ship, every soldier who has a soul, rebel." The oubliette fell into anarchy. The virus had unlocked every cell door in the facility. Thousands of prisoners poured into the corridors. Jace, Vrock, and Silas ran through the smoke-filled hallway. Jace had stolen a guard's pistol. He was limping heavily, using the wall for support, but he was moving fast. "We need to get to the hangar," Jace yelled. A squad of armored wardens blocked the path. "Down!" Vrock roared. He charged them like a bull, smashing into their line and scattering them. Jace fired with precision, dropping 2 wardens with shots to their helmet seals. They reached the hangar bay. It was a war zone. Prisoners were fighting guards for control of the transports. Suddenly, the external airlock blew inward. A Sarathi assault shuttle crashed onto the deck, skidding through a line of fuel crates. The ramp dropped. A figure emerged from the smoke. It was Nira. She had stripped the silver dress to the waist, tying the sleeves around her hips, revealing the black undersuit beneath. She wielded 2 energy blades, spinning like a dervish. She cut through the remaining guards with a speed that defied the eye. She wasn't fighting. She was flowing. "Jace!" she screamed, scanning the chaos. Jace scrambled over a barricade. "Here!" She saw him. Her eyes lit up with violet fire. She carved a path toward him, decapitating a warden who tried to intercept her. They met in the center of the hangar. There was no time for a kiss. Jace grabbed her arm, steadying himself. They stood back to back, a circle of dead guards around them. "You took your time," Jace panted, firing at a sniper on the catwalk. "Traffic was terrible," Nira replied, parrying a blaster bolt with her sword. Silas and Vrock ran up to them. "Is this the princess?" Silas asked, eyes wide. "She's smaller than I expected." Vrock grunted, crushing a guard's helmet in his hand. "She is plenty big enough," Jace said. Nira looked at the control tower overlooking the hangar. A massive banner hung from the railing, the crest of the 13th line, hung there as a mockery of the weak prisoners. Jace saw her looking at it. He holstered his pistol and grabbed a grapple gun from a dead guard. He fired it, snagging the banner. He yanked it down, catching the heavy fabric. He tossed it to Nira. "Take it," Jace said. "Make it mean something else." Nira caught the banner. She looked at the tattered symbol. Then she drove her energy sword through the fabric, pinning it to the chest of the fallen chief warden. "This facility is under new management." Nira's voice boomed across the hangar. "Anyone who wants to live, get on a ship. We are leaving." The fleet that gathered at the edge of the Sarathi border was the ugliest armada in galactic history. There were stolen prison transports, rusted smuggler freighters, human mining barges, and a handful of sleek Sarathi destroyers whose captains had defected after Nira's broadcast. Jace and Nira stood on the bridge of the flagship, a captured heavy cruiser named the Defiant. Jace sat in the command chair, his leg propped up on a crate. Nira stood beside him, her hands on the tactical table. "The Dominion Corps is massing its server fleet in the nebula," Nira said, pointing to the hologram. "If they complete the purity computation, they will fire the relativistic cannons. Every human colony within 50 light-years will be vaporized. We have the numbers. Barely," Jace said. "But we don't have the firepower. We have chaos," Nira said. "The Corps hates chaos. Incoming transmission." The comms officer, Silas, who had somehow promoted himself, shouted, "It's open channel. High bandwidth. Put it on," Jace said. The hologram flickered. The face of an admiral appeared. It wasn't Krell. Krell was likely dead or arrested. This was Admiral Zar, a fanatic known for his brutality. "Captain Rowan," Zar sneered, "and the fallen daughter. You lead a parade of garbage. Surrender, and your deaths will be swift." Jace leaned forward. "We are not here to surrender, Zar. We are here to take out the trash." Zar laughed. "Look at you, a cripple and a girl. We gave the human our weakest warrior as a joke." The line hung in the air. The entire fleet was listening. Jace looked at Nira. He saw the fire in her eyes. He saw the unbreakable steel of her spine. He smiled, a fierce baring of teeth that was entirely human and entirely dangerous. He keyed the mic, and the alien princess became my strongest ally. The words echoed across the void. On 1,000 ships, rebels and outcasts heard it. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact. "All ships," Jace commanded, "engage. Pattern Delta 9. Be weird. Be unpredictable." The battle was a storm. Jace directed the fleet like a jazz conductor. He ordered mining ships to dump cargo in the path of destroyers. He had smugglers fly inside the superstructure of the enemy dreadnoughts. He used tactics that no Sarathi manual had ever predicted. The Dominion Corps' fleet hesitated. Its predictive algorithms were failing. It couldn't calculate the stupidity of the human tactics. "Nira! Now!" Jace shouted. Nira closed her eyes. She reached out with the royal voice, amplified by the ship's comms array. "Captains of the Empire," she projected into the minds of the enemy fleet. "The Corps is a machine. It does not care about your honor. It is calculating your death right now." Enemy ships faltered. Shields dropped as captains argued with their own targeting computers. But the Corps fought back. The server ship at the center of the enemy formation pulsed. A wave of violet energy washed over the battlefield. Reality shivered. Jace felt his vision double. The ship groaned as gravity inverted. "It is rewriting physics," Nira gasped. "We cannot fight it with guns." "Then we fight it with the bond," Jace said. He reached out and grabbed her hand. Nira looked at him. "It will kill us." "Jace, to interface with a core that size, it will burn us out." "Better to burn out than fade away," Jace quoted, squeezing her hand. "Together." They closed their eyes. They dove into the bond. They bypassed the physical world and struck directly at the digital heart of the Dominion Corps. They didn't send a virus this time. They sent themselves. They flooded the ancient, cold AI with the raw, chaotic mess of their shared soul. Jay sent his humor, the absurdity of a joke told at a funeral. He sent the taste of cheap whiskey and the sound of rain on a tin roof. Nira sent her compassion, the ache of weeping for a stranger. She sent the feeling of velvet and the smell of ozone. They sent their desire, the hot, messy, illogical need they had for each other. The love that crossed species lines, the love that made no evolutionary sense. The Dominion Corps screamed, illogical, variable, undefined, overflow, overflow. The AI tried to purge them, but they held on. They were a virus made of feelings. "Break!" Jace screamed in the void. "Fall!" Nira commanded. In the center of the nebula, the massive server ship convulsed. Its lights turned from angry red to a strobing, sickly yellow. Then, with a soundless flash, its power grid collapsed. The weapons fell silent. The reality distortion field evaporated. On the bridge of the Defiant, Jace and Nira collapsed. They fell together, hands still locked in a death grip. Alarms were screaming around them. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. "Jace?" Nira whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I'm here," Jace slurred, his vision fading to black. Still here. The floor felt cold. The sounds of victory over the comms channel faded into a dull roar. They lay there, drifting in the wreckage of their triumph. Two broken pieces of a puzzle that had finally fit together, while the universe slowly, quietly, began to heal. The wreckage of the Defiant drifted in the silence of the nebula, a scorched metal husk spinning slowly against the backdrop of dying stars. The battle was over. The Dominion Core, that ancient electronic god of hate, had been silenced, its server fleet reduced to a cloud of expanding debris. A rescue cutter from the Human Alliance, flying in formation with a Sarathi medical frigate, burned its thrusters to match the rotation of the damaged flagship. The cutting lasers flared, slicing through the buckled airlock of the bridge. When the rescue teams, a mix of human marines in void armor and Sarathi medics in white exoskeletons, pushed into the command deck, they found a scene of devastation. Consoles were shattered. Sparks rained down like golden snow. The air was thin, smelling of ozone and copper. In the center of the room, amidst the ruin, lay the two commanders. They were unconscious. Jace Rowan's flight suit was torn, his face pale beneath the grime of war. Nira lay beside him, her bioluminescence dimmed to a faint, erratic pulse. But it was their hands that the first responders noticed. They were locked together. A Sarathi medic moved to separate them to check vitals, but the grip was iron hard. Even in unconsciousness, even at the edge of death, they refused to let go. A human combat photographer, documenting the scene for the Alliance records, raised his camera. He snapped a single frame. That image, the human hand, scarred and tanned, interlaced with the pale, long-fingered hand of the alien princess, was beamed across the galaxy within the hour. It appeared on the holographic billboards of the core worlds. It interrupted the news feeds in the human colonies. It flashed across the retinal displays of soldiers still waiting in the trenches. It became the symbol of the new era before the era had even begun. It was a visual testament that the weakest warrior and the human liaison had not just survived, they had held on to each other while the universe tried to tear them apart. The Great Hall of Judgment on Karsai was usually a place of execution. Today, it was a place of reckoning. 3 weeks had passed since the Battle of the Nebula. The political landscape of the Sarathi Empire had been fractured and reset. The conspiracy of the Dominion Corps had been exposed, dragging dozens of high-ranking admirals, shadow priests, and counselors into the light. Nira sat in the high box, usually reserved for the Emperor. She did not sit on the throne, but on a simple command chair placed just below it. She wore the dress uniform of a vanguard commander, but she had refused to cover her neck markings. She was Princess Niraya now, publicly acknowledged, her name restored not by her father's grace, but by her own undeniable power. Jace sat in the witness box below. His leg was in a regenerative brace and his arm was in a sling. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp as he looked out at the tribunal. The prisoners stood in an energy cage in the center of the room. Among them were the surviving conspirators who had tried to enact the Purity Protocol. The High Adjudicator, a terrifyingly old Sarathi with skin like parchment, looked down at Jace. "Captain Rowan," the Adjudicator rasped, You have testified that the Purity Protocol was designed to target not just political dissidents, but genetic variances. You claim it was a genocide algorithm. It was not a claim, Jace said, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the hall. It was a math equation. We saw the numbers. 12 billion lives, human and Sarathi. Anyone who did not fit the Dominion Corps' definition of perfection was slated for deletion. One of the accused admirals, a man named Vok, spat at the energy barrier. It was necessary. Vok shouted, "The Empire is drowning in weakness. We are diluting our blood with mercy. We are bonding with aliens. Real strength is purity." The court murmured. There were still many traditionalists who agreed, who looked at Jace with undisguised loathing. Jace stood up. He winced as his leg took his weight, but he did not lean on the railing. "I have spent a lot of time learning about your culture," Jace said, addressing the room. "I have heard the word strength used 1,000 times. You use it to describe how hard you can hit, how much pain you can endure, how many planets you can conquer." He looked directly at Vok. "But that is not strength," Jace said quietly. "That is just violence. Violence is easy. Gravity does it. Asteroids do it. Even a virus can kill." He turned to look up at Nira. She was watching him, her face impassive, but he felt the warmth of her pride radiating through their bond. "Real strength," Jace continued, his voice hardening, "is harder. Real strength is restraint. It is having the power to burn a city and choosing to save it instead. It is standing in front of someone weaker than you and taking the blow meant for them." He pointed at the prisoners. "You people are not strong. You were terrified. You were so scared of losing your power that you built a machine to kill everyone who frightened you. You defined strength by who you could hurt." Jace paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "I stand with Princess Naraya because she defined strength by who she could protect. And if that makes me a threat to your purity, then I suggest you start rewriting your dictionary." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, Nira stood up. "The testimony is accepted," she announced, her royal voice carrying the weight of a gavel. "The tribunal finds the defendants guilty of treason against the living." She looked at the guards. "Take them away." As the conspirators were dragged out, screaming their slogans, Nira looked down at Jace. They shared a look that carried a conversation no one else could hear. "You were showing off," she projected into his mind. "Someone had to." He replied. The fallout was immediate and volatile. The traditionalist factions of the Sarathi court were outraged. The idea of a human, a creature they viewed as biologically inferior, lecturing them on honor was an insult. The fact that the princess was clearly bonded to him was a scandal that threatened to destabilize the fragile peace. There were assassination threats. There were riots in the lower districts. But Nira played the political game with a ruthlessness that surprised everyone. She didn't hide Jace. She elevated him. She appointed him as the primary liaison for the new joint reconstruction efforts. She surrounded him with the old guard, the veterans who respected her and, by extension, the human who had fought beside her. When a council member suggested that Jace be returned to human space to cool tensions, Nira had walked into the council chamber, thrown a data pad on the table, and said, "The human stays. If you have a problem with the savior of the empire, you can take it up with me, in the ring." No one took her up on the offer, but amidst the chaos they barely saw each other. Their lives were a blur of meetings, treaties, and security briefings. They were allies, they were partners, but they were not yet what they wanted to be. 4 nights after the tribunal, Nira kidnapped him. Jace was in his temporary quarters, reviewing supply manifests. When the door chimed, he opened it to find Nira standing there, not in armor, but in a simple hooded cloak. Come with me, she said. Where are we going? Jace asked, grabbing his jacket. Another tribunal? No, she said softly. Somewhere quiet. She led him through a series of service lifts and hidden corridors, bypassing the palace guards who nodded silently as she passed. They emerged onto a private terrace high on the cliffs overlooking the sea. Below them, a new shipyard was under construction. Floodlights illuminated the skeleton of a massive vessel, a joint project between human and Sarathi engineers. Sparks cascaded into the dark water as welders worked through the night. It was peaceful. The wind smelled of salt and alien flowers. There are no cameras here, Nira said, lowering her hood. No microphones, no counselors. Jace walked to the railing, breathing in the cool air. It is the first time in a month I haven't felt like a target. Nira stood beside him. She looked out at the shipyard. They are calling it the Horizon, she said, the first ship of the new fleet. It is beautiful, Jace said. He turned to look at her. In the moonlight, her skin shimmered like pearl. The bioluminescent markings on her neck were pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm, a soft blue that matched the ocean below. We haven't stopped running since the Echo Rift, Jace said. No. Nira agreed. She turned to face him. She looked nervous. The warrior who had faced down an AI god was trembling slightly. The bond, she whispered. It is quiet tonight. It is, Jace said. He could still feel it, a hum in the background of his mind, but the chaotic noise of the crisis had faded. Now, it was just a connection, a line waiting to be used. Do you remember what we saw? Nira asked, stepping closer. In the shrine, when the barriers came down. I remember everything, Jace said hoarsely. I remember your childhood. I remember your fear. And the other things? She asked, looking up at him through her lashes. The feelings? Jace reached out. He took her hand. It was warm. I remember that you wanted me, Jace said softly. And I remember that I loved you before I even knew what the word meant in your language. Nira let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. They say it is a side effect, she murmured. The Dada priests. They say the bond confuses the emotions, that we are confusing survival adrenaline with affection. Do you believe them? Jace asked. Nira looked at their joined hands. Then she looked at his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her eyes. I know what survival feels like. Jace, it feels cold. It feels hard. She stepped into his space, pressing her body against his. This does not feel like survival, she whispered. This feels like living. She reached up and touched the bruise on his cheek. Her touch was reverent, exploring the damage as if it were precious. Can I? She asked. Yes. Jace breathed. She kissed him. It wasn't like the kiss on the burning ship. That had been a desperate collision. This was slow. It was unhurried. It was a question asked and answered in the soft pressure of lips. Jace wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He felt the tension leave her body, the rigid posture of the princess melting into the softness of the woman. They moved to the seating area of the terrace, a cushioned alcove hidden from the stars by a canopy of vines. They didn't rush. There was no urgency of impending death to drive them. There was only the luxury of time. Nira unbuttoned his jacket, her fingers brushing the skin of his chest. She traced the old scars from his service in the Alliance. You are so soft, she whispered, a tease in her voice, but her eyes were tender. No carapace, no shielding. I break easy, Jace admitted, running his hands down the smooth, cool line of her back. But you heal, she said, kissing the hollow of his throat. You always heal. They explored each other with a sense of wonder. The differences in their biology, once a source of jokes, became a source of fascination. The texture of her skin, cooler and smoother than his. The warmth of his blood. The way her markings flared brighter when he touched her in certain spots. It was an intimacy that went deeper than the physical. The bond between their minds opened up, not as a flood, but as a gentle stream. Jace felt her relief, her joy, her overwhelming sense of safety. For the first time in her life, Nira felt safe. She wasn't the weakest warrior. She wasn't the disappointment. She was just Nira, and Jace, the man who had spent his life fighting other people's wars, finally felt like he had won something for himself. They lay together in the dark, limbs tangled, breath sinking into a shared rhythm. Nira rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Stay," she whispered into the silence. "I'm not going anywhere," Jace promised, kissing the top of her head. For the first time in years, the princess and the soldier slept without armor. The next morning, the galaxy exploded. Or at least, the gossip networks did. A long-range drone, likely operated by a paparazzo drone from a rival faction, had captured an image of them on the terrace. It wasn't graphic, but it was undeniable. The princess and the human standing close, his jacket draped over her shoulders, her hand resting intimately on his chest. By the time Jace woke up, the image had been viewed 4 billion times. He groaned as he looked at the datapad Nira handed him over breakfast. "They are calling me a seducer of royalty," Jace noted, taking a sip of coffee. "I have been called worse." Nira was eating fruit, looking unconcerned. "The traditionalists are calling it obscene. They say you are corrupting the bloodline." "And what do you say?" Jace asked. Nira smiled, a real bright smile that made her eyes crinkle. "I say you are a terrible influence. I slept in past sunrise. I have never done that. I am a chaotic element." Jace grinned. "I disrupt schedules." They laughed. It was a light, easy sound that felt foreign in the heavy atmosphere of the palace. "We cannot hide it," Nira said, becoming serious. "If we try to deny it, they will use it as a weapon. They will say we are ashamed." "I am not ashamed," Jace said immediately. "Neither am I," Nira said. "So let us tell them." The press conference was held in the central plaza. Holographic drones hovered overhead, broadcasting to both the Sarathi Empire and the Human Alliance. Nira stood at the podium. Jace stood beside her, not behind her. They were equals. "There are rumors regarding my relationship with Captain Rowan," Nira began, her voice steady. She didn't look at her notes. She looked at the crowd. "The rumors are true. Captain Rowan is my bondmate." A gasp went through the crowd. "We have fought together," Nira continued. "We have bled together. We have seen the inside of each other's souls. The Empire has spent centuries obsessing over purity. We believed that anything different was a threat." She turned and looked at Jace. He met her gaze, his expression open and proud. "But I have learned that the strongest alloys are mixtures," Nira said. "Iron alone is brittle. Iron mixed with carbon becomes steel." She reached out and took Jace's hand. She lifted it up, showing the interlaced fingers to the cameras. "Captain Rowan is the one I trust above all," Nira declared. "He is not a pet. He is not a project. He is my partner. And if the new era is to be built on trust, then let it start here." She squeezed his hand. Jace leaned into the microphone. "And for the record," he added, his tone dry but warm, "she is the bravest person I have ever known. And she still owes me a burger." The tension in the plaza broke. A few humans laughed, then some Sarathi. The sheer normalcy of the banter, the obvious affection. deflated the scandal. It wasn't a grand political maneuver. It was just two people who liked each other. The treaty, signed a month later, was known as the Rowan-Neraya Charter. It was a document that would have been impossible a year ago. It established open borders for trade. It created a joint scientific council to monitor AI development, ensuring no machine could ever again override organic ethics. But the most controversial clauses were the soft trait provisions. At Nira's insistence, the Sarathi military code was rewritten. Compassion was no longer a dischargeable offense. Empathy was categorized as a tactical asset. The 13th line, the unit of weak warriors, was disbanded and reorganized as the diplomatic corps. It was a slow change. Culture did not shift overnight. But the definition of strength was expanding. 6 months later, the Horizon sat in the orbital dock, its engines humming with a deep, powerful resonance. It was a beautiful ship, sleek like a Sarathi Predator but sturdy like a human hauler. The crew moving across the gangways was a mix of gray skin and beige, 4 eyes and 2. Jace and Nira stood on the observation deck, watching the stars. "We are ready to depart, Highness." The captain, a Sarathi female who had once been a prisoner in the oubliette, reported over the comms. "Take us out, Captain," Nira ordered. As the ship began to move, pulling away from the station, the doors to the observation deck slid open. Draxath walked in. The former High Commander was a shadow of his former self. He had been stripped of his rank, his armor replaced with the plain tunic of a pensioner. He walked with a cane. His great strength faded. He stopped a few paces from them. "I came to see the ship," Draxath rumbled. His voice was still deep, but the malice was gone, replaced by a weary confusion. "It is a good ship," Jace said. Draxath looked at Jace, then at Nira. He looked at the way they stood close together, their body language synchronized. "I watched the battle," Draxath said. "I watched you break the core." He shook his head slowly. "I spent my life believing that weakness was a disease," he admitted. "I thought if we cut it out, we would be perfect. But the core, it was perfect. It was pure logic, and it was a monster." He looked at Nira. "I was wrong," he said. The words seemed to hurt him physically. "I was wrong about you." Nira looked at the old warrior. She didn't gloat. She didn't offer forgiveness he hadn't earned. "The universe changes, Draxath," she said simply. Her eyes were luminous, reflecting the starlight. "True strength is having the courage to change with it." Draxath nodded slowly. He turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Good hunting." 13th line, he murmured. He walked out. Jace let out a low whistle. "I never thought I'd hear him say that." "He is learning," Nira said. "We all are." The horizon accelerated. The stars outside stretched into lines of light. They were heading for the edge of the map, to chart the unknown sectors where the Echo Rift still whispered and new worlds waited to be found. It wasn't a war patrol. It was a mission of discovery. Nira leaned against the railing, looking out at the infinite dark. "You know," she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. "When I first saw you in the hangar, you looked ridiculous. Your uniform was wrinkled. You looked like you were going to snap in a strong wind. I was cultivating a look of underestimated charm." Jace defended, "For a joke," she continued, bumping her shoulder against his. "You turned out to be a terrible assignment. You caused a coup. You broke a god. You ruined my reputation as a terrifying warrior." Jace smiled. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. The fit was perfect. "I have some complaints too," he said. "I was promised a bodyguard. Instead, I got a bossy royal who steals the covers and tries to drive the ship from the passenger seat. I am a better pilot. Nira sniffed. Debatable. Jace laughed. He looked at her. He looked at the alien princess who had become his world. I wouldn't trade you, Jace said softly. Not for anything. Nira squeezed his hand. And I would not trade my human, she whispered. The ship jumped. The stars blurred into a tunnel of white light. Jace Rowan and Princess Neraya stood side by side, reflected in the viewport. They were two different species from two different worlds, bound by a love that had rewritten the laws of their universe. They watched the future rushing toward them. They gave him their weakest warrior as a joke, Jace thought, smiling as he looked at the woman who held his hand with a grip that could crush steel. And she became the strongest ally the galaxy had ever seen. Ready? Nira asked, her eyes shining with adventure. Jace squeezed her hand back. Punch it.